Hello everyone, I am back, and this is a video I've been planning for quite a while, and it's going to be a long one because I'm going to be reviewing all movies and TV shows that I have watched and or rewatched while in lockdown. When COVID-19 was unleashed and basically destroyed planet Earth for all of 2020, it pretty much prevented us from going anywhere. Can't go to movie theaters, can't go to bars, can't really go anywhere. So what else are you going to do besides sit inside, drink, and watch a bunch of stuff on streaming, which is really what I've done. And with all the different things that I have watched and rewatched, I thought it'd be an interesting idea to just go back and review everything that I've watched to date so far in the lockdown. Things that will be excluded from this, because, this video is pretty long as it is, but things that are going to be excluded from this video are anything wrestling related, because I'm reviewing that stuff in separate wrestling videos. The biggest wrestling thing I've been watching has been WCW Nitro, which if you've watched my last video, you know I'm through the first half of 1997. I'm also excluding Thundercats, because I pretty much already covered that in my top 20 Thundercats episode video, which is posted on Vimeo. My first and only video that's posted on Vimeo, and that had to be broken up into 3 separate parts because copyright rules are a bitch, and YouTube is awful for various reasons. So Thundercats is going to be excluded from this discussion, and I'm also only going to talk about things that I've completed watching. Like right now, the things I'm watching are Hercules: The Legendary Journeys and Xena Warrior Princess. I'm rewatching both of those shows. And on Disney Plus, I'm currently in the process of rewatching The Adventures of the Gummy Bears because I want to go through all the Disney afternoon shows again. And that's the one I'm on currently, but I haven't finished those shows yet, so I don't want to review those. So maybe there'll be a part 2, a follow-up, where I review the remainder of the things that I watch. But for right now, those things are still in the process of being rewatched, so those will not be reviewed as part of this. So with all of that said, I've still got a ton of things to review for you guys. And without further ado, let's just go ahead and get started. Let's get started off with movies. Now, anybody who knows me knows that I'm a huge fan of the Universal monsters, the classics from the 30s and the 40s. And I have all the classics right here on Blu-ray. Dracula, Frankenstein, The Wolfman, The Mummy, Creature from the Black Lagoon, all of the classics right here in this set. But we're going to be talking about this guy right here, the Invisible Man, who has his own series of films, really. There's a bunch of different invisible person movies that were released by Universal, but the original is a personal favorite of mine. The original starring Claude Rains was ahead of its time in a lot of ways and was one of those movies, one of those early gems that really pushed the boundaries of what you could do with special effects. And it was also kind of a dark comedy, which was not common back in those days. So it's very innovative and very interesting, and The Invisible Man has always been one of my favorites because of that. And there's been many attempts at accomplishing that idea of an invisible man. I remember when I was in middle school or early high school maybe, there was that movie called Hollow Man. There was that one with Chevy Chase, I believe it was called Memoirs of an Invisible Man or Diary of an Invisible Man. I forget the name of it. It wasn't very good either way. But the Invisible Man concept is one that's always pops up every few years or so. It's not as prevalent as, say, vampires or werewolves, but it's one that always seems to pop up and be used in something. And Universal Studios opted to give The Invisible Man a remake earlier this year. Boom. The Invisible Man came out earlier this year and got a theatrical release until COVID hit, and then it got released to streaming. Now, I want to make this point perfectly clear in talking about this movie. I had absolutely no desire to see this movie because, unlike something like Godzilla, where Godzilla, I'm also a huge fan of that, obviously, if you don't know. Godzilla is a franchise that typically gets treated well whenever it comes back, so I'm usually excited for the next version or the next reboot of Godzilla. The Universal Monsters is a franchise where whenever they do a remake of Dracula or Frankenstein, Dracula and Frankenstein are in the public domain, so anybody can make movies about them. But it doesn't matter because they're typically horrible, and I just get angry and upset and frustrated whenever a new one comes out because it's like, oh no, not again. They're going to screw it up again. There aren't many good remakes of these classic characters, and I feel like they deserve a lot of respect because they were the granddaddies of cinematic horror, and they deserve to be put up on a pedestal. So whenever I see these remakes, they just feel like soulless cash grabs. And they're not even good at being that. They're just really lazy, terrible movies for the most part. The Wolfman reboot or remake with Benicio del Toro was at best okay, but still not what I was looking for. And And then, of course, there was the attempt at the Dark Universe with the Mummy movie with Tom Cruise in it. That was just a complete fiasco and failed and killed the universe before it even started. And it was another victim of the long list of attempts at trying to mimic the Marvel Cinematic Universe and failing miserably. So I had absolutely no interest in seeing this movie because I just thought, okay, it's another fucking terrible remake. Here we go. So had COVID not happened, I probably would not have seen this movie because I was not about to go spend my money on a movie ticket and waste a day, an afternoon going to a movie theater and sitting through a movie that I thought was going to piss me off. When it came out to streaming, after the lockdown started, people told me, it's like, Patrick, I think you'll actually like this movie. You should probably give it a chance. And I'm like, come on, really? Are you serious? No way. No way this is any good. And I saw it, and I gotta say, I actually really liked it. It was refreshing to see one of the Universal classics get updated and treated with respect, and we actually got a pretty good movie in the process. And where this movie succeeds, where a lot of these other remakes fail, and I'll compare it to The Mummy with Tom Cruise, because that's where a lot of the comparisons are going to get drawn anyway. For some reason, whenever they try to remake one of these movies, they try to make it a big budget spectacle with special effects and action and everything else. And they, throw all the money at it. And I'm just sitting there with my hands on my head and just going, guys, they're monster movies. They're horror movies. You don't need to throw $100 million at these things. You can make these things for $10 million and they'll be great. Just, spend your money wisely, you can make them cheap, and you're guaranteed to make a profit. Keep it simple, stupid. You don't gotta make it a bigger, larger-than-life spectacle, because that's not what these movies are. That is not what these movies are. They are simple horror movies that excel at being simple, and that's what this movie does really, really well. It takes the concept, puts some new twists on it, because here the Invisible Man is an inventor and a scientist that is an abusive boyfriend that's got his girlfriend victimized. And she escapes from him at the beginning of the movie, which is a very tense and well-done scene, by the way. And then he uses his Invisible Man abilities to stalk and torment her and basically ruin her life and get her to come back to him. And so you got the whole abusive relationship thing going on there, and that adds an extra layer of horror to the Invisible Man character. And I think it works really, really well. Effective scares. And the best part about the entire movie, I gotta say, is the performance of Elizabeth Moss, who you may know from Mad Men, and which is funny because I rewatched Mad Men back in December. So Elizabeth Moss is still somewhat fresh in my mind. And to see her in this, I thought she hit it out of the park. I thought her performance was great because she sold the terror. In a lot of horror movies, we get wrapped up in who the icon is, who the horror icon is, the monster, the Freddy Kruegers, the Jason Voorhees, the Chuckies, and the classic Universal monsters. But at the end of the day, it's really about the characters they're tormenting, the victims of their wrath. They're the ones that have to carry the story. For as great as Freddy Krueger is, his movie would be nothing if he didn't have Nancy. For as great as Dracula is, without Van Helsing, something's missing, because Van Helsing presents a strong rival for Dracula. You also have characters like Mina, who is his victim that everybody's trying to save her from. So you need people to sell the terror of the monster for it to work. And I thought she did a bang-up job where she looked and felt like a person who had been abused and a person who was just a broken human being and had to find her strength to overcome the further tormenting that this man was unleashing on her. And I thought her performance really carried the film, and I thought it was very, very good. And there's a lot of great horror set pieces. They take advantage of the gimmick of the Invisible Man very well. There's a lot of really good usage of it. And overall, I thought the movie was very, very strong, and I was like, wow, I like that way more than I would have ever thought. Something that I rolled my eyes at when I heard they were making it. I was like, fuck you, I'm not seeing that. And then I check it out, and I was like, you know what? It's actually really good. It's actually really good. And so, bravo, Universal. They learned their lesson. It took 40 failures for them to finally learn their lesson, but they learned their lesson. And hopefully we can get more movies like this, because I'm sitting there as a lifelong fan. I'm like, God, dude, like I said, the original is one of my favorites. The original is one that I hold near and dear to my heart. This movie is a worthy reboot, remake, whatever you want to call it. It is a worthy reintroduction of the Invisible Man and that entire concept. And I loved it. And more in that spirit, if you can do a Dracula or a Frankenstein or a Wolfman or a Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is one that has escaped being remade, and I thank God every day for that, but it's like, dude, if you put the same amount of care into Creature from the Black Lagoon that you did into this, I'd probably be okay with it. Now, that's not to say the movie is perfect. There are a couple of flaws. One flaw that stands out to me is one of my knocks on some Invisible Man movies is that they give the Invisible Man like superpowers, and to me he's not supposed to be super strong or super durable. He's just a regular guy that's invisible, and that's something, going back to Hollow Man, that was a movie where they pushed his superpowers while invincible to the max, where it felt like he was borderline invincible, and it was ridiculous. But this movie isn't as bad as like Hollow Man in that regard, but it does lean into it a little bit. There are a couple of scenes where it's like, he shouldn't be able to do that just because he's invisible. But that amounts to minor nitpicking, and there's a few other minor nitpicks here and there. But overall, as far as keeping the tension going, and as far as keeping the drama up and focusing on Elizabeth Moss's great performance, I think this movie succeeded where a lot of other remakes fail. So kudos to that, and I am very grateful to have seen it. Now, one thing that I marathoned the holy hell out of while in lockdown are the DC animated movies, the ones that are straight to video, and started in the 90s of the Batman the Animated Series era, and continue to this day, with the most recent one being Justice League Dark Apocalypse War, which, oh my god, if you want to feel bad, watch Justice League Dark Apocalypse War. That thing was tough to sit through. And I mean that in a good way, where emotionally, it was just very emotionally draining to watch. But in total, I think I watched about 40 DC animated films. And I'm not going to sit here and review every single one, because God will be here all day. Maybe that's a separate video series I should do, where I review all the different DC straight-to-video animated movies that I've watched. I will say that generally I enjoyed them. For every bad one, there was like 6 or 7 good ones, with the occasional great one that knocked my socks off. So there was a lot to enjoy there, and I was really happy to go through and finally sit through a bunch of those and watch them, because I had skipped so many of them. But, you know, when you're in lockdown, you've got the time now, right? So, what I'm going to do, instead of reviewing all of them now, I will talk about the first one that I watched, which is a rewatch. And it's a movie that's very important to me, because it's one that I saw in the theaters when I was a kid. So this was not a straight-to-video film. But it was the one that kind of started the trend of DC's animated films. It's the one that kind of got the ball rolling. And also, by doing that, it also became the gold standard of DC animated films. And that is Batman the Animated Series, the motion picture, Batman Mask of the Phantasm. To this day, it is one of my favorite theater experiences, because again, I saw this when I was a kid, and quite famously, this movie didn't do so hot when it came out to theaters. It was a very limited theatrical run. I don't think a lot of people knew when it came out, but I did. I remember seeing a trailer for it on a VHS for a Warner Brothers video. I don't even remember what movie it was. And I remember looking at my dad and just being like, when that trailer popped up, I remember looking at my dad and just being like, we're seeing that, just so you know. Just so you know, we're seeing that movie. Just to warn you ahead of time, we're seeing that movie. And Dad was okay with that because he likes Batman. But Batman the Animated Series, and I guess I'll talk about my feelings on that show. Batman the Animated Series, to me, is the definitive version of Batman. The definitive adaptation. I guess the comics are like the definitive Batman, just by virtue of that's where the character was born, that medium. But Batman the Animated Series, when I think of the adaptations, it gave me my favorite Batman, who's Kevin Conroy. His voice is iconic. It gave me my favorite look for Gotham, that Art Deco, or I think they called it Goth Noir. That black on black, very unique, like clearly like Metropolis, that old silent film Metropolis, not Superman's hometown, that inspired the look of the show. And actually, to bring up Superman again, they clearly drew inspiration from the old Fleischer Superman cartoons, which were like the first action-adventure cartoons ever made. And the look of the show was so unique. The feeling of the show, the music, Shirley Walker's amazing music just always hit a home run in the show. And, you know, when I think of that show, I also think about the great voice cast, where we got the definitive version of many of Batman's rogues gallery. Most obviously the Joker, played by Mark Hamill, who's my favorite Joker, to be honest. We also got like definitive versions of like Two-Face and Mr. Freeze. I mean, this show basically invented the modern perception of Mr. Freeze. Because before that, he was just a cold villain gimmick. And now he's thought of as like one of the top rogues in Batman's rogues gallery because of this show. And that was actually one of the best episodes of the show, the one that introduced Mr. Freeze. Heart of Ice was a home run hit. So when I heard they were doing a movie, I was obviously very intrigued by it. And this is a movie that I've owned it on VHS. I don't have a Blu-ray, but I do have the DVD. And how cool is this poster, by the way? I mean, this poster is just awesome-tastic, just so epic. But Mask of the Phantasm, even with all the live-action Batman movies that we've gotten, ranging from the awful Schumacher films, and rest in peace, Joel Schumacher, I never wish death on the man, he recently passed away, to the greatness of like the first Tim Burton film and the Nolan films, The Dark Knight being the one that stands out to me as the great film in that series. With all the different versions of Batman on a cinematic level, I still say Mask of the Phantasm might be the best Batman movie ever made. What I like about it is that it captures everything that's great about the animated series, from the look, the style, the music, voice acting, all of it is great. But it amplifies everything, so it's a little bit more violent. I remember being in the movie theater and being shocked when I saw blood. I was like, whoa, this movie doesn't pull any punches. The storytelling's a little bit more complicated. When I saw it in theaters, I was actually confused by the constant flashbacks and jumping back and forth between past and present, which is probably my exposure to that. Well, I guess A Christmas Carol kind of does that a little bit too, but this one was one of my earliest exposures to that type of storytelling, going back and forth between past and present. And it's also a little bit edgier. Like, I already referenced the violence, but there's a sex scene in this movie. They cut around it as best they can, but like clearly Bruce and Andrea at one point in the film, they straight up have sex. And which completely went over my head as a child. I didn't pick up that that's what's going on. I thought they just made out. But watching the movie with adult eyes, I'm like, oh no, they fucked. They totally fucked. But still, to me, this represents like the very best of what the people that worked on this show were capable of doing. And when they're not restrained by TV censors, they can go even further. People die in this story. The mobsters of Gotham are being victimized by a mysterious killer named the Phantasm, and Batman has to crack the case on why this killer is killing these mobsters, and also clear his good name, because Batman gets blamed for these crimes because, you know, masked person shrouded in darkness. People obviously mistake that for Batman, so he ultimately gets blamed for the gangster murders. And that brings about the Joker and various other conspiracies, and people get involved in this tangled web that revolves around Bruce Wayne's past and how he first became Batman, and some of the bumps on the road that led to him becoming Batman. And all of that is very, very interesting to me, but what makes this work for me so well is that most Batman movies are not detective stories. I think the closest we've gotten was probably The Dark Knight, which leaned into the whole like crime drama aspect of it and had a little bit of detective work. But generally, they're action movies, and that's typically how they treat Batman. But Batman to me is very different from like the likes of like Superman or Spider-Man or anything like that. Batman is a detective. There's always been this fascination with me in like those old noir movies like the Maltese Falcon and mysteries like that. And Batman, you can tell that type of story with, and it'll work very, very well generally. And this is the closest we've ever gotten on a cinematic level to that type of Batman story. And with a big mystery that he's trying to solve, then he slowly unravels it throughout the course of the story. And all of that was very, very cool to me and very intriguing. Whenever I watch the film, and I've watched this movie like at least 100 times, it's something that I've always appreciated about it. And like I said, if you like Batman the Animated Series, there's a real good chance you've already seen this, but it is an amazing, amazing Batman film, and one that I hold in very high regard. It isn't perfect. I should point that out. There are a couple issues I have with the ending that I wish they had fixed. I won't spoil it, even though the movie's 2.5 decades old, almost 3 decades old at this point, but I don't want to spoil anything, but what I will say is I wish they'd handled the ending a little bit differently. And there is a movie in the DC animated library that they did, Under the Red Hood, where I think Mask of the Phantasm is overall a better movie, but Under the Red Hood handles its ending a little better. And that's all I'll say. I'm trying not to spoil both films, but I think if you give Mask of the Phantasm Under the Red Hood's ending, I think it would be perfect. But as is, I think Mask of the Phantasm is very, very good, and I recommend it highly, especially if If you've never seen Batman the Animated Series, shame on you. You should get on that immediately. But I kid, of course. I don't like to shame people. But if you haven't seen Batman the Animated Series, you can go ahead and start with this, and I think it'll show you everything that made that series work. Again, from the visuals to the voice acting to the more complex storytelling, and everything else that made this show great, and everything that made the DC Animated Universe great as a whole. Whenever I rewatch this movie, it makes me nostalgic for shows like that, and not just Batman, but also the Superman show and the Justice League show and Batman Beyond, and those type of things. So Mask of the Phantasm gets huge thumbs up for me. I think it's great, and you should all check it out. Now let's move right along to the Blu-rays that I got as birthday presents. For those of you who remember that live stream, I did a little unboxing where I got some birthday presents sent to me. Since we were right at the beginning of the lockdown and couldn't go anywhere, my sister was kind enough to send me these movies to make sure that I had something to enjoy while locked in my own home during my birthday. And the first movie I watched was Whiplash, a movie that came out in 2014 and stars Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons. And I gotta say, this movie came out roughly 6 years ago. I had never seen it. I'd heard of it. I'd heard people talk about it, but I didn't even know exactly what it was about. I just heard the title thrown around, and I knew J.K. Simmons was in it, but I didn't know much about it beyond that. And watching this movie, I have to say, I am kicking myself for not watching this when this first came out, because this movie is quickly become one of my all-time favorite films. This was a joy to watch. It was tense and dramatic and crazy, and a bunch of shit happened, and I was on the edge of my seat the entire time, but I just loved almost every aspect of this film, and it really centers around the relationship between these two characters, played expertly well by Miles Teller and J.K. Simmons. I was not surprised to hear that J.K. won the Academy Award for this. I don't typically follow the Academy Awards, but when I heard he won, I'm like, yeah, that's deserved, for sure. That's deserved. And I thoroughly enjoyed this movie from start to finish. I thought it was great. I thought it was fantastic. And if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's amazing. And I think what I liked about it, and this is coming from somebody who's never participated in anything musical. I have no musical talent at all whatsoever. So this was just, it was exposing me to something that I don't have a whole lot of familiarity with. Actually, there were scenes where JK's character is yelling at Miles Teller and telling him he sucks and he's doing it wrong. Not my fucking tempo! And I'm like, it sounded okay to me. I don't understand, but I'm not a music guy. But I do understand drama, and I do understand desire and driving to be the best that you can be at whatever it is that you've chosen to do. Those are things I can understand. And to see Miles Teller's character, Neiman, broken down and just slowly be almost turning into like some weird hybrid of both J.K. Simmons' character and like almost an addict in a way, where it's like he just has to keep getting better, and he has to keep getting better, and throwing more things in his life away to ensure that he gets better. There's a girlfriend in there that he throws away at the drop of a hat, just because, like, nope, music comes first. That's how it is. And J.K. Simmons' performance, Fletcher, I think the character's name is a complete force of nature all the way through. Like, if they wanted to do a movie about Vince McMahon, I really feel like J.K. Simmons could play Vince McMahon and do a really good job at it, because this character is such a raging perfectionist, curses up a storm at every corner, and his insults are great. It's almost like watching a better version of Gordon Ramsay. Like, this guy could give anxiety to Gordon Ramsay. He's that unhinged. And watching this, my jaw was on the floor the entire time, just watching him go to work. It's like, oh my God, this is one of the greatest characters ever put to film. This guy's amazing. And I just loved every second. I just couldn't take my eyes off of the screen just watching him perform. And that's really, again, the strength of the film is the two strong performances to carry it. And as the events of the film progressively get crazier and crazier and crazier, as they get deeper and deeper into Neiman's attempt to become the best musician that he could possibly be, it becomes all the more dramatic and becomes way more interesting as things like come to a head in a big way, and I won't spoil it. But yeah, this film's fantastic. It is absolutely fantastic, and I highly recommend it to everybody, although there's a real good chance you've already seen it because it's a fairly old film, and that won awards, so I'm the one that's behind the times on this one, but I love this film, and the only bad thing I have to say is that I'm upset that I didn't watch it when it first came out, which is a shame. Now, there are certain things about the story that some people might say is a plot hole, but I kind of like. And again, I don't want to give it away. There's a portion where something bad happens, and Neiman is able to take advantage of it for his own gain. And we never find out exactly why that thing happened or who the perpetrator was or what exactly took place. I like that they left that ambiguous, because in my head immediately I'm like, oh, it's Fletcher playing mind games. It's him. It's totally him playing mind games. He totally set this entire thing up. And but we never get an answer to it. We never find out exactly what happened. And I'm okay with that. I like the ambiguity there, because in a weird way it keeps the tension rising, because you don't know exactly what Fletcher's going to do, where he's coming from, or when he's going to snap. Sometimes he seems like a normal, chill dude, and then the next minute he's cursing up a storm. You think he's going to yell Neiman's head off, but then he doesn't, and he actually goes in a different direction that actually benefits Neiman. And there's a few things like that in the film that I really liked, and you never know exactly where he's going to go. And I like that. And that, again, that kept the tension of the film rising. It's almost like an R-rated Willy Wonka in a way. When I mention Willy Wonka, I talk about the original with Gene Wilder, where you don't know exactly what's the truth or what's reality with Willy Wonka. And Fletcher, J.K. Simmons' character, is exactly the same way, where you don't know exactly where he's going to go or what the method to the madness really is. And at the end of the day, the entire film is largely about how far is too far to achieve greatness. Like, how far are you willing to go to achieve greatness? And there's a speech that J.K. Simmons has in the film where he talks about the two most damaging words in the English language are the words "good job." And true perfection demands like the highest of high standards. And in an insane movie from an insane character, like, that almost made sense. Like, it actually was like, he's actually got a point in a way. And a lot of great gems and great pieces of dialogue and insults and cursing tirades all throughout this film, and I absolutely loved it. I've actually watched it twice since, which is rare for me. Normally I watch a film and I'll revisit it when I feel like it. I'll revisit a film when I feel like it. But in this case, I was like, I've got to watch that again. That was crazy. So I literally watched it straight through twice in a row because I just enjoyed it that much. So yeah, love the performances, love the story, loved everything about this film. I thought it was great, grand, and wonderful. And if you're like me and you hadn't seen it until 2020, I highly recommend checking it out. Now, I am going to do my absolute damnedest to get through this review without crying, but this is one that kind of hit me in the feels a little bit and kind of hit a little too close to home in places, but was overall a very good movie, and I'm glad I watched it. It's a movie called The Peanut Butter Falcon. It's a movie that came out last year, more of an independent film, and it stars Shia LaBeouf, Dakota Johnson, who I believe was in the 50 Shades of Grey movies. I've never watched those. Shia LaBeouf, who of course you know, he was like the hot thing for a few years when Transformers first came out and became like everybody's most hated actor for a while. And it also stars an unknown by the name of Zach Gottsagen. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Zach is an actor who really has Down syndrome. He's a real Down syndrome actor. And the movie was written and produced and made specifically to star him and to kind of achieve his dream of starring in a movie, and tells his story. Now, to explain why this movie hit a little too close to home for me, and I think I've talked about this briefly before, but to delve into my family life a little bit, which I don't like to get overly personal, but I think I have to talk about it to kind of provide proper context for this film and why I reacted to it the way I did. I grew up with a brother with Down syndrome. He unfortunately passed away back in 2011. And he was my best friend. I loved him to death. He was the ray of sunshine in everybody's life, and everybody who met him loved him, and he was just a wonderful, wonderful person. So to see this movie that was done specifically to kind of give highlight to a person with Down syndrome, that again, it hit a little close to home for me, and especially this character. The whole point of the movie is that he's leaving the nursing home that he's been sent to, and he wants to go become a professional wrestler. That's his dream and his goal, and he wants to meet his favorite wrestler, who in this movie I believe it was called the Saltwater Redneck. Who's not played by a wrestler, although wrestlers do make cameos in the film. I will get to that in a little bit. But Andy and I, my brother, wrestling was something that we bonded over. We were both huge Hulkamaniacs as kids. And we both loved The Undertaker. I think Undertaker was his personal favorite, if I'm being perfectly honest. So he was also a big fan of Goldust and Kamala. And Rob Van Dam. He loved Rob. So yeah, when I saw all of this stuff, when I saw the premise of the film and I saw what they were going for, I'm like, oh, this is bringing up some good memories. Good memories, it's bringing up some very good memories, but still, it's hitting me right in the feels. And I think what we got out of this film was a very sweet, very emotional, and just very innocent and well-made feel-good movie. If you want to feel good that day, if you want to see something that's just sweet and mostly wholesome, I think this is a good movie to watch. I was touched by the film, shall we say. I thought it was very charming. I think Shia LaBeouf, who has gotten a lot of shit over the years, I thought this is, if not his best performance, it's very high up there. I thought he was very good in the film. Dakota Johnson is very charming in it. Most of the cast is very charming in it. And of course, Zach, who's the main focus of the film, the main character, he's a very charming guy and very likable, and you want him to achieve his dream. And I'd heard that one of the inspirations for this film was sort of like a Huck Finn and Tom Sawyer style adventure, which is that's definitely there as well. But ultimately, it's just three people going on this adventure of a lifetime to just achieve this very simple dream of Zach getting to go to a wrestling school and get trained by his favorite wrestler. And again, it's a very, very sweet film that has a few emotional punches in it. I'll be completely honest here. There was a portion of this film where when it happened, I had to turn the movie off and go cry for 5 minutes because again, memories of my brother just came rushing back to me. But it was also like kind of the emotional gut punch of the film. And it's nothing like overly dramatic that happens. It's just it's Shia LaBeouf and Zach just talking to each other, and that's the scene. But what they said to each other kind of hit a little close to home for me. And I don't want to spoil too much. I'm trying to avoid spoilers as much as I can with these reviews. But again, if you're looking for something that's a nice, sweet, feel-good movie, I highly recommend this one because I was certainly touched by it. Got tears out of me. And of course, if you're a wrestling fan, there's plenty of wrestling references, and I'll go ahead and spoil this. Both Jake the Snake Roberts and Mick Foley make cameos in the film. So if you want to see them in a movie, go check it out. And it was pretty cool to see Jake and Mick in it. Jake in particular is quite the dickhead and quite great in the film. But yeah, no, I think the movie is sweet, and it's just a very nice, feel-good movie. And again, for me, it hit a little close to home for obvious reasons. But for what it is, I think it's very well made, and it was super funny. My sister, when she sent it to me, she's like, yeah, this one's going to make you cry. And I'm like, yeah, okay, a movie called The Peanut Butter Falcon, fuck you. And then I saw it, and I'm like, God damn it. God damn it. And The Peanut Butter Falcon, the title does make sense throughout the course of the film. I won't spoil it, but it does make sense throughout the course of the film. And overall, I just thought it was a very charming, sweet, down-to-earth, feel-good movie. There's, in a world full of big, action-packed, special effects-driven spectacles, it was kind of nice to see something very down-to-earth and human, and something that was as sweet as it was. So I was very happy with it, and I was glad I watched it. And the final birthday Blu-ray I received is the movie Prisoners, a movie starring Hugh Jackman and many other great actors. Jake Gyllenhaal's in this. Also Viola Davis, Terrence Howard. It's a pretty star-studded cast. And my sister thought I would enjoy this one because I am a big fan of things like Unsolved Mysteries. More on that in a little bit. And this entire movie felt like one long Unsolved Mysteries reenactment. For anybody who watched the original show, and you know exactly what I'm talking about, it's a film about basically two kids are found to be kidnapped. They go missing. I believe it was Thanksgiving dinner, and the parents go absolutely batshit crazy to try and find out where their daughters are and who took them and what happened. And Hugh Jackman's performance in particular goes a long way to carrying the film, as his desperation rises and rises and rises. And he does more and more questionable things to try and find out where his daughter is. And all that is very good. And of course, I can, even though I'm not a parent myself, I can certainly sympathize with the, two men that are looking for their daughters. Because I can't imagine there's anything scarier in the world than your child being abducted and taken from you and disappearing. That's got to be the scariest feeling in the world. And so something like that, it has stakes that are instantly recognizable and anybody can sympathize with. And as you see Hugh Jackman's character act more and more unhinged, you kind of like support it in a way, because like, look, he's got to do what he's got to do to find his kid. Like, I don't know what I don't know what you're supposed to do. But the acting's very good, tension's very good. Couple of issues with the story, particularly with the ending and how everything played out. I wasn't the biggest fan of the ending, but overall, I thought it was an enjoyable mystery, kind of true crime kind of movie. And it's one of those movies that we've probably seen 100 times, of a man taking the law into his own action, or taking the law into his own hands or whatever. And that type of stuff, but presenting it in a fairly different type of scenario that we don't normally get. So I was okay with it. I was glad that it didn't turn into like an action-packed like bloodbath, or like a Arnold Schwarzenegger style shootout, or a Clint Eastwood style shootout, or Charles Bronson style shootout, nothing like that. And I love those movies, don't get me wrong, but this felt like something different. And again, the vibe I got from it instantly was like Unsolved Mysteries reenactment turned into a movie with better acting and better production values, obviously, but that type of thing. So it was a very interesting mystery. I enjoyed the film. Probably my least favorite film of the 3 Blu-rays that I got for my birthday, but still enjoyable nonetheless. And good stuff all around. It was just a really good movie. And since I've already mentioned it, I think now's a pretty good time to segue into the different documentaries that I've watched while in quarantine. Various docu-series, I guess they're called. And let's start off with the one I just finished watching last week. Unsolved Mysteries, the rebooted series on Netflix, the new version of Unsolved Mysteries. And let me start off by saying that I grew up a huge fan of Unsolved Mysteries. Like, it was, honest to God, if you asked me my top 10 favorite shows of all time, I would have the original Unsolved Mysteries on that list. That show is that important to me. For many, many reasons. One, it gave me nightmares at a very young... I was watching this show at 6 years old. I've joked with people. It's like, before my parents had the talk with me about the birds and the bees, I knew what a serial rapist was because I watched Unsolved Mysteries. Thanks a lot, Robert Stack. And, but it really got me interested in, like... not like criminology or anything like that, because I did take a criminology course in college, but it was never like a passion of mine. But it did get me interested in like finding ways to help people. And I had it in my head at a very young age that we should be watching shows like America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries and things like that as a way to help people, because they give us information that we can use to find bad guys and help reconnect broken families and things like that. It's a way to help people. And I saw value in those shows. Now, granted, Unsolved Mysteries was a lot more theatrical than America's Most Wanted and shows of its kind. And America's Most Wanted had some very intense stories in there, even some of the same stories as Unsolved Mysteries. But Unsolved Mysteries did it in a way that would just chill you to the bone and leave you scared and afraid to go to sleep. Every murder, kidnapping, rape, bank robbery, and even when it delved into the more supernatural side of things like UFOs and aliens and ghost stories and old myths and legends and things like that, it still had a way of like sticking with you, and it did that through bone-chilling music, the reenactments that made, even if the acting wasn't great, and some of them the acting's not great, and some of them the acting's spectacular. I highly recommend checking out the Larry Dickens murder, which famously has Matthew McConaughey in it in the reenactment, and that one's one of probably the best acted reenactment in the entire original series. But you had these reenactments that made these horrible events feel real. And in the case of like things like ghost stories and aliens, which I don't normally believe at face value, I've never said that I completely disavow the existence of aliens, UFOs, ghosts, specters, poltergeists, whatever. But most of the time, these stories feel like hogwash. But you watch Unsolved Mysteries and the reenactments are so good, they feel real. And they stick with you. And that was another thing I admired about this show, is that it felt like nothing was off limits. If there's a mystery, if there are unanswered questions, it belongs on this show. And I'm like, okay, great. But my heart was more with the true crime stories, because that was where I felt like I could actually do some good and help catch bad guys. And not for my own personal glory or anything, but more for like, dude, this guy needs to be off the fucking street. This is terrible. Like, what is going on here? This is awful. And there are a lot of bad dudes that were highlighted on Unsolved Mysteries, like some of the worst people you'll ever come across. But they did a reboot originally back in the late 2000s with Dennis Farina as the host. And I guess now's a good time to talk about Robert Stack and what he brought to that show as the host. His narration could, again, like send shivers down your spine. And he was just as scary as the people that were being highlighted on this show, and really added to the kind of horror element that the show had going for it. And when they switched him out for Dennis Farina, and that show had a bunch of other problems, namely there were no new cases. There were also not any... They changed the style of the show, so it was like they cut out all the music and everything that made it special, and it looked more like America's Most Wanted. So it was like everything that made the original series special was just gone when they did this reboot. So when I heard they were doing another reboot on Netflix, I was intrigued, and I was like, okay, we'll see how this goes. And I'm definitely going to check it out. And I watched it last week. I got through it all in a day, because of course I did. And unfortunately... it's not a bad series. I'm not going to sit here and say it's a bad series. It's a perfectly well-made, true crime style mystery series. The problem is it's not Unsolved Mysteries. The things I just talked about that made the original show special are not there. The music's nowhere near as good. I like the piano version of the original theme, but other than that, the music that they have in this are nowhere near as good. The reenactments are not what they were in the original show. The reenactments are like almost... they're without dialogue, and they're just like visual aids for the people talking more than anything else. Kind of like, in Dark Side of the Ring. Kind of like that, where you would have these segments of like these silhouetted versions of the scenes that actually took place, and they kind of punctuate what's being said by the people being interviewed. And that's kind of how the reenactments function here. It's not the same as like when Robert Stack was narrating these horrible events as they went down. One other segment I think of when I think of how much Robert Stack added and how much the reenactments added to the show, the Richard Church rampage and his murders, where he broke up with his girlfriend and just went completely nuts and tried to kill her whole family. That is one of the most bone-chilling segments that show ever did, and in large part because of the reenactment and because of Robert Stack's narration, neither of which is here. Who did they get to replace Robert Stack as the host? Nobody. It doesn't have a host. And I know Robert Stack is near impossible to replace. I understand that. And I like that they paid homage to him in the intro by having a brief glimpse of his face. But you gotta have a host. And now granted, who do you get to host it? I don't know. I was talking about it with a friend of mine, and the only name we could come up with was Josh Brolin. That was literally the only name we could come up with who could possibly take Robert Stack's place and be the host of Unsolved Mysteries for a new generation. Another problem that the show has is that instead of, in the old format, it was an hour-long show with commercials, so we're talking like, 40 to 50 minutes in between that range, and you get 45 cases in that time. Here, it's 6 one-hour-long episodes. Some are shorter. I think they range from like 40 minutes to an hour. But you get 6 one-hour episodes, and each one is one case. And there's a benefit to that. The benefit is that a lot of details don't get left out. And that was one of the problems with the original show, where for the sake of time, a lot of details had to be left out. And so you don't get that here. The problem here, though, is that there's a lot of repetition. And there's a lot of stating the same thing over and over and over again. I think that was really true in the first case that they did, Ray Rivera's disappearance, where his family members were kind of saying the exact same things over and over again. You weren't getting... there were some pacing issues, I think, with that. But I like the original case or the original format where you get like 4 or 5 different stories. You get like a murder, a bank robbery, a potential feel-good lost love type of story or something like that. But here you don't get that. And the variety of the cases is not very good this time around. Again, it's 6 cases. And of those 6 cases, 5 of them are disappearances. And of those 5 disappearances, 4 of them became murders. And trying to find out what happened. Well, not murders necessarily, like unexplained death, at least. And so there's not a whole lot of variety in the different cases that you get. Then you get one UFO story, which was the worst episode of the set. But now that said, again, I don't want to sound like I'm crapping on it, because the cases they did present were very interesting, and I was hoping for a happy ending with those. The first case, Ray Rivera's disappearance, there's a huge gap there. And that's what the family's trying to find out. Like, what exactly happened to him between him leaving his home that night after a phone call and him, them finding his body plowed through the parking garage of a hotel where he presumably jumped off the top of the hotel. What exactly happened? Was he murdered? Did he commit suicide? I'm leaning towards suicide. I think something, I think something inside him snapped, and it may have been work-related, stress-related, something. I don't know. But whatever it was, I think he snapped and just jumped off the hotel. But again, we're missing the security footage. We're missing potential gaps in the story, like what caused him to snap. And if it was something work-related, why is the business he was working for and his friend who hired him, why are they not talking? Why did they, why are they not providing full information on what's going on? So there's a huge gap there, but I'm leaning towards he committed suicide. That's what I was thinking. But again, there's a huge gap in the story there. Until we find out more information, find out what happened, we'll never know for sure. Then the next case was the disappearance of a mother who was later found dead 600 days later, leaving behind a teenage son and a second husband, not the father of the son. And there's clearly an issue there because they don't seem to like each other too much. And trying to find out what happened to her. Was she the victim of a random act of violence? Were serial killers involved? There were 2 serial killers that were interviewed that are potential witnesses or potential suspects in her disappearance and death. And nobody really knows. And it's just a matter, again, it's like finding that one piece of the clue. And I think it's like there's a 13-minute window of when she had her last phone call and when she disappeared. And that's the frustrating part. It's like, what the hell happened in those 13 minutes that caused what happened? The obvious one to point fingers at is the husband. Here's what I'll say. I'm not convinced that he did it or had anything to do with it. I will say he is one of the single strangest people ever interviewed for Unsolved Mysteries, and that is covering a lot of ground for anybody who watched the original show. There were some weird ducks that got interviewed for that show, and he is one of the top 5 strangest that has ever been interviewed. At the very end of the episode, they show him when her skeletal remains were found. He requested that the skeletal remains be reassembled, and they do that for him. He admits to kissing the skeletal remains. Then he also admits to having her cremated and sleeping with the box of ashes, which, by the way, he whips out the ashes for the camera right at the end of the episode. And I'm like, this is a weird fucking dude. Like, I wouldn't do any of these things, nor would I admit to doing any of these things. Weird ass fucking dude. And again, obviously there's an issue there with the son and the husband, because apparently she kind of mollycoddled him a little bit and wouldn't discipline him, and he was a bit of a hellraiser, and they butt heads a couple of times. I think there was a significant age difference between the mom and this new husband, and that may have been the cause of some issues. Who knows? But whatever it is, there's got to be somebody that saw what happened, or could provide some clues to figure out what happened. Again, I'm not saying that the ex-husband had anything to do with it. I'm just saying that he's a weird-ass human being, and, yeah, he's just weird. He's one of the kookiest characters to ever be featured in Unsolved Mysteries, that's for sure. And then the third episode does something a little different. The entire episode's in French with subtitles. Normally, if someone couldn't speak English and was interviewed for Unsolved Mysteries, they would have dub over in English. So if you're used to that style, this may be a little off-putting. Personally, I'm used to watching foreign films, so it didn't bother me that much. Again, this episode was probably the one where I felt the repetition the most, but it's almost got this like urban legend type of feel to it, where this aristocrat snapped and murdered his family and left their bodies behind at home while he just took off and disappeared into the wilderness. It's a very odd story. It almost feels like it's going to be a ghost story, the way it starts up, but it's actually a true crime story, as they never found the father, and they don't know what happened to him. And this didn't happen like decades upon decades ago. I think it happened sometime in the mid-2000s. And my personal take, I think the father's dead. I think he went off into the wilderness and shot himself. It's just a matter of finding the remains. I think if he wasn't a French aristocrat, he would have a hard time blending in and disappearing. I feel like somebody would have seen something by that point, especially given the given like how high profile it was that he murdered his entire family. I just feel like he would have been found by now. So I think he killed himself and his remains are somewhere in the wilderness. God knows where that is, but I don't think he's any longer alive. That's my take on it. Then the fourth case centers around some racial tensions as a young black man was found dead in Kansas following a party where his friends inexplicably left him behind at the party. And then the next day he disappeared, and they found his shoes and his hats on the side of the road. And then the police did an investigation, couldn't find anything. Family decides to go out into the woods and do their own investigation. They found his body in 30 minutes, and of course it causes a huge shitstorm. I'm surprised I didn't hear more about this case. I thought I would have heard something, but maybe it was so long ago that I've just forgotten about it. But it seems like something that would have come up. And apparently there were racial tensions at the party where he got into it with one of the people at the party. They don't give a name for that person, but again, it's one of those stories where we're missing like the key element of information. There's a gap there where we need that information. A lot of people are asking, why did the friends leave him behind at the party? I think I know why, and they don't want to say it to not sound crass or something. I think it's alluded to a little bit in the episode, but not fully stated. But I think that he hit it off with a girl, and he saw a chance to seal the deal, and he told his friends to leave. Or they saw that he was going to seal the deal, and they decided to leave him to. It's like, oh, he's in good hands. He's gonna get laid tonight. I've seen that same exact scenario play out so many times at parties. It would make your head spin. I myself have been in that same situation at parties where. Well, I won't go into the details, but I've seen it happen. Let me put it that way. And that may have been the cause that got him in trouble, because he was probably, there's a real good chance he was hitting on the wrong girl and pissed off a racist, and sparks flew and something happened. I could also envision a scenario where the racist boy, whoever it was like, we don't take too kindly to you folk around these parts, and then, got his friends together and they like took his shoes and his hat and just made him wander off into the wilderness while he was drunk off his ass, and they found him. However, it is a little weird that police took cadaver dogs, they took everything out into the wilderness and could not find his body. And then when the family goes out there, they found him in half an hour. It's like, all right, so either the police are incompetent, or the people that did it knew that they were investigating and hid the body until they figured the investigation had cooled down. Then they threw the body out there, and then the family found it. I mean, again, I don't know. I'm trying to put myself in the mind of a killer, and I can't quite do it. But do I think he was murdered? Yes. Personally, it's a little weird, like the entire scenario, and it's just a matter of you got to be able to pin this on somebody at that party. Somebody at this party saw something, and I'm shocked that nobody's come forward. Like, even like a witness to something. because the only witnesses we have are the friends, and they left him behind, and they seem very guilty about it, to be perfectly honest, and they probably should feel guilty. But when you're young and alcohol's involved, I guess you feel invincible, and you feel like your friends are invincible too. So bad decisions are made. You combine alcohol, late at night, youth, and horniness. I mean, you combine all of that, it leads to a bunch of bad decisions getting made, and that's probably was what got the ball rolling on what unfortunately took place that night. Personal opinion, I feel like he was murdered, and it's just a matter of getting information out of one of the people that was left at the party with him and were witnesses to something, because somebody saw something. There's no way that something didn't happen. It's possible that, I don't know, like, did whoever did this, like, force everybody to keep their mouth shut or something? They mentioned in the documentary that everybody who was interviewed from the party immediately lawyered up, which is not an uncommon thing to do. I mean, I feel like if you're being asked about a crime that took place, you should lawyer up, because you don't know exactly where the investigation's going to go and what they're going to pin on you. And you got to, even if you're completely innocent, you make sure you have all your ducks in a row. I mean, I would, to be perfectly honest. Even if I wasn't there, like, even if I wasn't a witness and I just got falsely implicated in something, I'd be like, all right, talk to my lawyer, who I will get soon, like, because you don't know where the investigation's going to take it. But in any case, it is a very tragic situation, and it's like, come on, the family deserves answers. Let's kind of let's figure out what happened here, because like, this is ridiculous. And then the fifth episode was my least favorite of the bunch. It was the Berkshire UFO one. It's the one kind of supernatural kind of story that they did, which is, it weirdly made it feel like Unsolved Mysteries, because like, all right, finally a break from all the disappearances and murders. But it wasn't that interesting, and again, because the reenactments weren't that good, it didn't leave much of an impression. It was just a very basic UFO story that I've seen tons and tons of different and better versions of in the classic Unsolved Mysteries. So it was just kind of, that was the one episode I was kind of half paying attention to be perfectly honest. So that one wasn't my cup of tea. I think the best episode was the last one, because it frustrated me so much. And there's a type of Unsolved Mystery story, and this goes back to the old days. There's a type where I am so angry at it because what the fuck is the mystery? I know who did it. That motherfucker did it. And there are plenty of cases where that's the case. A lot of them, it's a wife disappears and you know the husband did it. I remember the Polis case, where the husband, his wife disappears, and then he goes inside his house with his parents, and they immediately clean the house from top to bottom. I'm like, oh yeah, because that's what innocent people do. Jesus Christ. And then there is no Unsolved Mysteries case more frustrating than the Wendy Camp disappearance. Read up about that one sometime. That one continues to be frustrating to this day. There are updates that are happening to this day that continues to make this case super, super frustrating. But this fell into that type for sure, because what we have is a terrible mom, apparently, who raised her 5 daughters. And one of those daughters was a witness to her mom and a boyfriend committing a murder of an ex-boyfriend or ex-husband or something. I'm struggling to remember all the details all of a sudden. But and then when it came time to implicate the mother in that murder, the daughter, who has an infant son, mysteriously disappeared, and no one knows what happened to her, and her remains were never found. And it's like, okay, is there any doubt that the mom had something to do with this? It's just like, it's funny how, like, people, especially when you interview the daughters and they tell some of the stories from their childhood of what their mom was really like, it's like, okay, I'm getting a bad picture here. Now, to be fair, normally when I go into fuck you, you did it mode with these cases, they will interview the other person. The Polis case I just described, they interviewed the husband in that case. The Wendy Camp disappearance, they interviewed the people who I know did it. And I'm like, you fucking did it, you liars. And, but here the mom turned down any interviews, which some would see as like an admission of guilt. But it's like, yeah, you know, I mean, I can understand people not wanting to be a part of something that they think is going to point the finger at them. But at the same time, like, the more information that came out, it's like, is there any doubt that the mom had something to do with this? Unless something completely changes in how the story plays out, I really feel like all the answers lie with the mom. And it's like, wow, so she killed her daughter? Is that really where this is going? Oh my God, I guess so. And somehow got custody of her infant son, which is the other thing that kind of made my jaw drop. I was like, oh shit. So this was like the most heartbreaking of the bunch, because again, there's no answer. And the story even ends with the siblings going to a potential site where they think that her remains might be on their old house property. Of course, they find nothing, but it's that one was kind of a heartbreaking case. Especially, I feel frustrated knowing it's like, I really feel like she had something to do with it. I really do. But yeah, so that's the 6 episodes. I wanted to, it's fun to talk about individual Unsolved Mysteries cases. Actually, an idea I had like 8 years ago for this channel. I even got a trench coat for it. I was going to dress up like Robert Stack and do like a top 20 Unsolved Mysteries cases. I ultimately decided not to do it because I couldn't envision a way I could do it that didn't look like I was somehow glorifying murder or rape or crime or something like that and trying to like sensationalize it. When really what I wanted to do was like just talk about how much the show scared the crap out of me, and for the cases that were unsolved, like bring a little extra attention to them and see if I could help them get solved. But I don't think I'm talented enough to do that, so I ultimately scrapped that video. But that was my thoughts on the new Unsolved Mysteries. Again, I think it's a perfectly well-made true crime style show. It's not the classic Unsolved Mysteries, but it seemed to garner a lot of attention. I heard it was the #1 show on Netflix last week, so that's a good sign. So maybe they'll do more, I hope, because I think this first set was called Volume 1, so maybe we'll get more, and they can kind of like take these criticisms to heart and kind of tweak things a little bit. Like, okay, maybe not do 1 case per episode, maybe do 2 cases per episode. Little changes. Get a host. Like, for the love of God, get a host. Because I think that adds a completely different dimension to the proceedings. But in any case, Unsolved Mysteries, the new version, I didn't hate it, but it wasn't quite the classic series in my eyes. Now, next up is a docu-series that I am super excited to talk about, and that is ESPN's The Last Dance, which showcases and chronicles, the name The Last Dance comes from the Chicago Bulls' 6th championship during the Michael Jordan era. And it was proclaimed as the last dance, the last time that the entire team with Coach Phil Jackson and the key players would all be together vying for a championship. And so it gets its name, The Last Dance, but really while you watch it, it jumps back and forth between time periods. And throughout the course of the documentary, you get the entire history of Michael Jordan's entire time with the Chicago Bulls. Starting in the 80s when he was like there around the time of like the Magic Johnsons and the Larry Birds and that type of stuff. And going into their early championships in the early 90s, their first three-peat, and having to overcome the Pistons with Dennis Rodman on the team. And then later on to like Michael Jordan's exit from the NBA, and then coming back and then having another three-peat, which is an accomplishment I can't imagine any other athlete being able to pull off. But yeah, so really they call it The Last Dance and they focus heavily on the final championship, but it really is like the history of Michael Jordan's time with the Chicago Bulls. They even cover the Dream Team, the Olympic team, which I was never a huge fan of that, to be perfectly honest, because it's like, oh, we're going to take all the best American players that are the greatest basketball players in the world and put them all on one team. It's like, oh, look at that, they won a gold medal. I'm like, no shit, really? You think they're going to win the gold? I'm shocked. But anyway, I'm being a shit stain for no reason. With all the information that they give, through all the history of the Chicago Bulls and everything that they did during the 90s, at a time when and that's one thing that really struck me while I was watching this. I almost took for granted how great the NBA was back then and the level of talent that was around. When you look at the Dennis Rodmans and the Charles Barkleys and the Shaquille O'Neals and the Patrick Ewings and Isaiah Thomas and all these other guys, it's like, holy shit. And during that decade, this team won 6 championships with 2 three-peats. That's insane. I mean, that is insane when you consider the high level of talent that was around at the time. And, and this is me being a jerk, but it's like, all this hype about the Dallas Cowboys being America's team, but really in the 90s, The Chicago Bulls were America's team, let's be honest. And I'm coming from somebody, and I've said this before, when it comes to basketball, my preference is more with college basketball. I prefer the NCAA. I get way more excited about March Madness than I do about the NBA. But even back then, like, and I've tried explaining this to people, because, you know, there'll always be the debate of Michael or LeBron. And I'll say this, it's like, look, we can debate over who the better player is, but who the bigger icon is, it's Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan, there was a point in time when he was the most famous person on planet Earth. He was a star that became bigger than the sport and bigger than most things you could ever imagine. Like, Michael Jordan had that level of fame and that level of popularity. And it was very cool to get, like, basically the entire history of his run with the Chicago Bulls all broken down and condensed into this nice, wonderfully well-made 10-part series. And I'll say this, you know, I've seen a lot of sports documentaries in my day. There's been plenty of great ones on the history of baseball. NFL Films has churned out some great ones about all the Super Bowl winners and things like that. You know, if you've ever seen the Football Life specials that air on the NFL Network, that stuff's great. ESPN has had some great 30 for 30s, and those documentaries are also great. I'm going to go out on a limb and say The Last Dance is probably the greatest sports documentary I have ever watched. And that's saying a lot, because I've seen a lot of great ones. But The Last Dance, in capturing everything that made that team special, everything that made that team great, it's all captured in those 10 episodes. And it's not all about Michael Jordan either. They give a specific episode to Scottie Pippen, who's probably the greatest number 2 in the history of basketball. They give one to Dennis Rodman, arguably the greatest defensive player in the history of basketball. They do one with Steve Kerr, who had those miracle shots, you know, in the championship. And Phil Jackson, the coach, he got his own episode. So it's not just all about Michael Jordan, but Michael Jordan really is the main focus. And, you know, a couple things I'll say coming out of this, I was like, I think my perception of both Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman changed after watching this. When I was a kid, I hated Dennis Rodman. Hated him because I thought he was a clown that made a joke out of the sport and was just an attention-grabbing sociopath. That was my impression of him, honest to God. Which is great for wrestling, not great for a real sport like basketball. I know I'm going to piss people off by saying that, but in a real competition, I prefer it to be... You can have personality, but I prefer you to be mostly straight, and I think Dennis Rodman became like a distraction. And at least that was my thought as a kid. Now, after watching this, I'm kind of like, I think he had some mental issues that needed help. I think he's a man that needed some help. I also think, listening to him talk, I was like, this guy is like a basketball savant. He's actually like a genius when it comes to basketball. And it's like, you know, if he had a better head on his shoulders, he probably could have been a coach. Because it was just fascinating to listen to him talk about what goes through his mind when he's playing a game. And, you know, they said in here he's like the greatest rebounder of all time. He does things that are great, that make him a great player, that don't always get talked about. Because normally when you talk about great basketball players, you talk about the offensive side of things, not the defensive side. But he was, again, you know, when you look at his work on the Pistons and with the Bulls, I mean, he's probably the greatest defensive player to ever play the game. And that's something that tends to get overlooked. Kind of like offensive linemen in football. Like, they just get... It's not sexy because it doesn't make the highlights, so, you know, that stuff just kind of gets overlooked. I also kind of changed my perception of Michael Jordan a little bit, because I think with Michael, especially at my age, growing up with him as a role model figure as a child, you kind of think of the wholesome Michael, the fun Michael that you see in the commercials, and then when you watch the games, you think of the competitor that he is. Seeing all that behind-the-scenes footage, it gave me a whole new insight into his personality. I'm like, oh God, this guy is crazy. This dude is crazy competitive to a degree that is frightening. And if I were his teammate, I would probably think he was an asshole. Like, it's that level of competition where he motivates people around him. But, you know, Bill Parcells, who I think is the greatest coach in New York Giants history, people said that he was an asshole. It's like, look, he got 2 Super Bowls, so clearly his methods work. And every other team he coached for, he left him better than when he found it. So I'm not going to argue with it if it works, but there were seeds in there that legitimately kind of surprised me about Michael. This documentary series also reinforced my hatred of the news media when it broke that Michael Jordan has a gambling problem because he was betting $10,000 on a card game. And I'm like, Okay, the people that got outraged over that in the media that kind of tried to run with that and ruin his reputation and everything, do you have any idea how little $10,000 is to Michael Jordan? I mean, a friend of mine and we were talking about this. It's like, all right, and he asked me, it's like, Patrick, what do you think Michael Jordan's net worth is? And I just threw a number out there. I said, I don't know, 50 mil. And he was like, Patrick, you and I are closer to 50 million than Michael Jordan is. That's how much money he has. You and I are actually closer to 50 million than Michael Jordan is. And then we look it up and it was over 2 billion. It's like, Jesus Christ. So did Michael Jordan have a gambling problem? No. He gambled within his means, which is what I do whenever I gamble. I gamble within my means. And his means are just a lot greater than mine. And I'm not going to argue with it. You know, he's master marketer. I mean, the ad campaigns and everything, the shoes, it's all amazing stuff. And I remember when Air Jordans were a really big deal. I never had a pair of Air Jordans. I didn't really want a pair because shoes were just never that important to me. But again, I grew up with Michael Jordan as like this huge icon. Again, he was bigger than the sport he played in. He was an icon of Americana. Like, he was, again, one of the most famous people on planet Earth at the height of his fame and his career. And it was great to kind of relive that, especially at a time where we're all trapped inside and can't watch sports. To get this wonderful piece of nostalgia just thrown on our laps was great. And again, to get like further insight into guys like Scottie Pippen and Steve Kerr and Phil Jackson and Dennis Rodman, all of that was great. And I think the people they interviewed were largely great. I still think Isaiah Thomas is an asshole, but that is what it is. For those of you who are not basketball fans, I will tell you right up front that yes, they do reference Space Jam, and yes, they do reference Dennis Rodman's run with WCW. So if you're interested in the non-wrestling things, there's plenty of that, or non-basketball things, I'm sorry. So if you're interested in that stuff, there's plenty of that in there too. So, and again, it was really fun to relive all that. And I forgot a lot of those great moments. I forgot about the flu game and things like, and the legend of Michael Jordan. Those were things that kind of went to the back of my mind, and just seeing it all happen again, it was, in some cases, it was like I was watching it for the first time, because Michael Jordan won his first championship. I was, 6 years old? So I don't have overly vivid memories of all of that. So to see all that play out, I thought was great and terrific. And, I mean, they really went to the nth degree with this. And I absolutely loved just about every second of this. Again, it's probably the best sports documentary I've ever seen. So if you are interested in sports documentaries, and if you are interested in this huge chunk of sports history, because at a time when almost everybody in the country loved the Chicago Bulls, I highly recommend checking this out, because this was an amazing piece of sports history that they just made it easy for us to experience and watch and relive. And I absolutely loved it. If you're like me and you lived through that era, this is great. And you're going to love reliving all of this stuff. If you're younger and you don't remember, or you weren't alive when all of this was going on, I highly recommend checking this out. Because, again, for the people who didn't live through Michael Jordan, I can understand how you don't get it. And I think after watching this, a lot of people who didn't live through Michael Jordan's heyday, they're going to get it. Because it's like, no, this is, again, to bring it back to the LeBron-Michael thing, it's like, look, we can debate over who the better player is, but one's a great basketball player, best basketball player of his generation. The other one is a mythical figure worthy of a constellation. There's a huge difference. And it's almost, I can't put it into words what the difference is. It's just palpable, and you can feel it, especially after watching this. And Michael Jordan, like I said, I kind of changed my perception of him a little bit after watching this, because I didn't realize how crazy he was. But it's like, he's kind of, in a weird way, he's kind of like Babe Ruth, Muhammad Ali, and Peyton Manning all rolled into one. He's like Babe Ruth in the fact that he's like the biggest icon of sports of his era, very much like Babe Ruth was. He's a lot like Muhammad Ali in that he's a dominant force that is the best at his game. When he was at his peak, he was the best and no one was better. And he's like Peyton Manning in the sense, because it's, again, with Peyton, we think of Peyton through the commercials, and he's like, oh, he's this fun guy, and he's great. And then on the field, he's like the best quarterback ever. But if you've actually watched Peyton and you listen to some of the things that he says when he's mic'd up, it's like, he's kind of a dick. He's kind of a dick. And he kind of like tortures the other players a little bit, but in ways that motivates them. And hey, Peyton Manning played for 2 different teams, made it to 4 Super Bowls, won 2. Can't argue with the results. So, and I think the Indianapolis Colts have been missing something since Peyton left. I think he added a lot to the Denver Broncos. They wouldn't have made it to those 2 Super Bowls without him, even though they lost one. And Michael Jordan, it's like, I can say pretty confidently, they would not have won 6 championships without Michael Jordan. And they had great players. Great players. Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, Steve Kerr, those guys. They would not have won 6 championships without Michael Jordan. And I feel confident in saying that. And Michael Jordan is one of the most legendary figures in the history of sports. And this documentary is a wonderful look back at his time with the Chicago Bulls and the history of the Chicago Bulls during that era. And the beginning, middle, and end of one of the all-time great sports dynasties of all time. I love this. I thought it was great. And if you're even remotely interested in basketball or sports, then this thing is a must-watch. Another docuseries that I watched is one that I think everybody watched, and I'm extremely late to the party in talking about this, but Tiger King, the story of murder, mayhem, and madness. I mean, again, I feel like everybody watched this, and I am super late to the party in talking about this, but it was something that dropped on Netflix very early into the lockdowns, and I think everybody was just kind of in awe watching this entire thing. It dropped at the absolute perfect time when everybody was home and stuck inside and looking for something to do, and they just watched this insanity get dropped on their laps. Thanks a lot, Netflix. Now, goddamn, I don't even know where to start with this thing. I'm trying to figure out things to say about it that haven't already been said, but if you're one of 2 people that hasn't watched Tiger King yet, it gives us a look into the subculture of owning private zoos and tigers. And, oh my god, I never would have guessed that the people that get involved in this shit are as crazy as they are, but goddamn, they are fucking lunatics. Holy shit! There is not... Okay, of all the tiger owners and the zoo owners, there's one guy who did time, and he's the guy that supposedly the movie Scarface was based on. Believe me when I say he is the most sane human being out of all the owners in this entire thing. There's one guy who leads a sex cult and has used the tigers as an excuse to bring in hot women and ultimately lead a sex cult. He is not even the focus of the documentary. He is not even, he's barely focused on it all, and he leaves an impression as this weirdo, this fucking weirdo that owns tigers and other animals. And the real focus is the rivalry between one Joe Exotic, who I actually remembered from his campaign, because I remember the campaign condoms that he was handing out, and I remember that being on the news back when he was running, and I was like, holy shit, I remember this guy. And his feud with Carol Baskin, that fucking bitch, Carol Baskin, that bitch killed her husband and fed his body to the tigers. I'm telling you, that's what happened. And their whole feud, which I still don't understand, because Carol Baskin, she's judging him for owning tigers and keeping them in cages, and she owns tigers and keeps them in cages. I don't understand the difference between what she's doing and what he's doing. But apparently she was not happy with her portrayal in the docuseries, which, everybody came out of that thing saying, she killed her husband. It's like I talk about with Unsolved Mysteries. There are some cases where you just know who did it. And it's like, wait a minute, so her husband disappears, she gets everything she ever wanted, the will is written in a way that highly benefits her, specifically references his disappearance, which as stated in the documentary is extremely rare, and she gets everything she wanted out of this, and I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna smile and nod, and if she ever tells me she didn't do it, I'd be like, sure, Carol, I believe you. But as crazy as all that is, really, Joe Exotic is one of the most interesting subjects of a documentary I have ever seen, because he is such a weird, eccentric, bizarre individual. And I should also note that this is one of those cases where, as Jim Cornette famously said once about the Montreal Screwjob, this is a heel program. There are no baby faces. That sums up Tiger King fairly well. There are no baby faces here. It's all heels. And it's heels and poor unfortunate victims that get tied in with this bullshit. And that's it. The main figures being focused on are major heels, and it's a heel program. So nobody came out of this thing, well, I mean, nobody, none of the owners came out of this thing likable, we'll say that. Some of the employees I feel bad for. It's like, come on, guys, you can get the fuck out of there. What are you doing? You know, but there's a guy in this thing that's missing his legs. There's a woman, I think she transitioned, I'm not sure. Maybe, I don't know, but they called her a woman in the documentary. And she lost her arm to a tiger. That is so far from the most interesting thing to happen in this, it's almost shocking. And it was like, it was something that I binged in a day because I was like, I gotta see what happens next. Because this thing is just getting crazier and crazier and crazier. And then when it got to the point where Joe Exotic was going to run for office, I burst out laughing and I had to pause it and just go laugh for like 10 minutes because it was like, of course it went there. Why wouldn't this insanity go in that direction? It's the craziest goddamn thing I've ever watched. And again, I'm trying to avoid spoilers as much as possible because there's a bunch of weird and crazy shit that happens. And it's a freak show. It definitely is a freak show, and I'm sure the producers that stumbled on to making this thing were like, oh my god, we hit pay dirt like nobody's fucking business. This is going to be something that people talk about. I guarantee you that was going through their minds when they were reviewing the footage and going over this and catching new footage and going through all the interviews. Is like, oh my god, this is crazy. I mean, the stuff that they got on film is so perfectly memeable. It's almost like it was made to be that way on purpose. Like, you cannot believe that it really happened this way, but sometimes, as they say, reality is stranger than fiction, and this is a perfect example of that, because these are people that you would expect to see on a show like Jerry Springer or Maury or one of those type of shows where everything's kind of exaggerated, and I believe that actors are hired for a good portion of them. Something like pro wrestling. I think my original thought on it was, it was like watching a version of The Jungle Book that features pro wrestling characters, but was produced by people that make true crime documentaries. That's the best way I could describe it. It is that bizarre and that strange. And again, there's really nothing I can say that hasn't already been said about it. I'm just saying I got swept up in it. I watched it right after it dropped, and I was sitting at home just with my jaw on the floor half the time. It's like, is this really happening? And just when I think it couldn't get any crazier, it somehow got crazier because, you know, when you have internet videos threatening to kill somebody, you have an accidental death, you've got people getting mauled by tigers, you've got the weirdest polyamorous relationship I've ever seen in my entire life. I like that statement implies that I've seen multiple polyamorous relationships. But it was just fucking weird. The entire thing was fucking weird. And I've never seen anything quite like it. And of course, it caught on like wildfire, and they're going to produce a TV show starring, or like a movie or something starring Nick Cage as Joe Exotic. I'm like, I don't know, that might be going too far, guys. But if you're going to cast people, I'm just going to recommend this one. If you're going to cast anybody for a Tiger King, like real dramatic show, I would recommend Lisa Kudrow as Carol Baskin. I think that's the role she was born to play, and she would absolutely hit it out of the park. Can't you see her sitting in front of the computer going, "Hi, all you cool cats and kittens"? Can't you just picture Lisa Kudrow doing that? She would be absolutely perfect. But God, her life is weird with her weird, like, subservient new husband who's like the weirdest manslave I've ever seen in my life. Like, their wedding, oh my God, their wedding photos. I just can't. I can't accurately describe what the hell I watched when I talked about this, and it's amazing that I can still recall so much of it, and I haven't watched it since it first dropped, which was a few months ago, and people have kind of like moved on from Tiger King. Like, Tiger King has kind of faded away already, and I'm sitting there like, Jesus Christ, like, I can still recall specific things that happened throughout the course of this thing. It was that level of crazy, and Netflix, you stumbled onto a winner with this one, because that was unbelievable. So, again, like I said, reality is stranger than fiction, and if you're looking for something real, and absolutely batshit crazy, I highly recommend Tiger King because it is one for the ages. Now, the final docuseries I watched is another one from Netflix that you may not have watched. It's called Don't Fuck with Cats. Now, this one was really interesting to me, and I actually saw it before Tiger King. And it was something that disturbed me. This one is not funny. This one is actually quite disturbing. And it covers a case that I'm absolutely shocked I don't remember, because I feel like this would have been national news. And it happened like roughly a decade ago, I think. And I'm like, I can't believe I don't remember this. But because it was turned into an international manhunt. It starts off with a guy trying to get attention on the internet, turns into him making videos about killing cats, and then turns into him making a video of him murdering somebody, and then it turns into an international manhunt. And I'm like, this must have been national news. I mean, it had to have been covered in the news, and I just don't remember it. But it covers the full story. And it's a very disturbing kind of true crime style documentary as it keeps elevating and gets more and more and more fucked up. And I will say, if you're squeamish, fortunately they show bits of the videos of the guy killing the cats, but they don't show him actually killing the cats, which, thank God, I don't need to see that. They also do not show him actually murdering somebody. They show like snippets of the video, like the beginning of the video, but you don't get to see the full thing, which I'm completely okay with that. I don't need to see that. I don't need to see poor little kitty cats get murdered, and I don't need to see a human being get stabbed to death by some psycho looking for internet fame. All of that said, the entire story is one, it starts off fairly simple of a guy that's like just kind of being a troll online and trying to get some level of attention, and then it slowly becomes him becoming a psychopathic murderer. And the process of getting from point A to point Z, I guess, it's kind of crazy to see how it all unfolds. And, as more and more people get involved in it, with the cat videos, it started with like a Facebook group trying to find out who this guy is. And then when there's an actual human life involved, it becomes, again, like an international manhunt. So to see that level of that escalation throughout the course of the story was really shocking to see. And the whole scenario is really, really kind of twisted and scary to see. And I believe, I'm trying to remember, I think it's like 3 parts, and each part's like maybe an hour and a half long or something. I don't know. Like it felt quick. I'll say that, because it didn't lose my attention at any point. It's a very well-made documentary. My only knock on it, the people that ran the Facebook group that went after him for killing the cats, they're interviewed as part of this, which they kind of have to be to tell the full story. But listening to them talk, these people are like, oh my God, they think they were the heroes in this situation. And they're really not. They're really kind of useless. And they have like delusions of grandeur. That's my opinion of the situation. And it's like, no, can we talk to like the authorities and like the investigators and those type of people? I trust them more than you guys who are like keyboard warriors that have delusions of grandeur that got made a fool out of constantly, and in some cases made things worse. If you watch this, with an open mind and not kind of taking into account that they were somehow heroic in what they did. I think their intentions were good. I think they just kind of got in over their heads and got fucked with by a lunatic. But in any case, if you're looking for something to watch on Netflix, I highly recommend this one because it is very interesting. It's very weird. It's dark and disturbing. And if you're into that type of shit, this is a good one. You can go check that out. Now, again, some people might remember this story as it happened. I feel like I should remember this because it wasn't that long ago, and I feel like something like this would have been covered pretty extensively on the news. But who knows? 10 years ago, I was doing God knows what, so so my memory's not as good as it should be. But anyway, yeah. Don't Fuck with Cats. It's an interesting docuseries and one that'll probably make it a little tough to sleep at night, but it's definitely worth a watch. Now, before I go into my next review, I want to talk about my love for one of my favorite fictional characters of all time, the greatest detective in the history of fiction, Sherlock Holmes. And I've said this before, but it bears repeating. My 2 favorite fictional characters of all time are Rocky Balboa and Sherlock Holmes. One for his heart, which is Rocky, and one for his brains, which would be Sherlock. And Sherlock Holmes is one of my favorite literary characters. Well, I guess by default he's my favorite literary character, but To me, even though he wasn't the first, like the stories by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle weren't the first detective stories, because Edgar Allan Poe did things like Murders of the Rue Morgue and things like that, but the Sherlock stories, to me, set the gold standard for mysteries and detective stories, and especially the short stories. They were so good and so interesting and so well written, and the payoffs are almost always great. Some of my favorite pieces of literature are those classic Sherlock Holmes stories, and what I have here, these are my copies. This features all 4 of the novels and all of the short stories that Doyle wrote, and 56 short stories in all, so that makes 60 altogether that he wrote, and I love most of them. Actually, oddly enough, the one that's probably my least favorite is the one that introduced Sherlock, Study in Scarlet, which was the first novel, and it's now I have a specific reason for not liking that one as much, but I don't want to spoil it for those who haven't read it. But that said, my first exposure to Sherlock were the Basil Rathbone movies of the 30s and the 40s, which I have on Blu-ray right here. Did not watch these. I might rewatch them now because I'm getting super excited talking about Sherlock. I also have audiobooks for all the original stories as narrated by one Stephen Fry, and they are terrific. They were the first thing that I got when I downloaded Audible, and I was very happy with that purchase. It was wonderful to get to relive all those stories, but with Stephen Fry reading them to me. It was wonderful, and I loved it. One of the best audiobook experiences I've ever had. But the version of Sherlock I'm going to talk about today is my favorite adaptation of the character. The Jeremy Brett version, the Granada TV series of Sherlock Holmes, which I have in its entirety on DVD. This is one volume of the full series, but I do have the full series on DVD. And this is my favorite Sherlock. So got trapped in lockdown. It's like, you know what I haven't watched in a while? Jeremy Brett is Sherlock Holmes. I want to watch that again, and I do not regret that decision at all because Jeremy Brett is a wonderful Sherlock Holmes, the greatest man to ever play, greatest actor to ever play, the greatest detective of all time, and ultimately resulted in my favorite adaptation of the character. Why is it my favorite adaptation? Well, if I had to guess, not only are the performances really good, not just from Jeremy Brett, but also David Warner as Dr. Watson, but most other adaptations don't actually follow the classic stories. They come up with their own material, which I like. I like that they do different things with it. Basil Rathbone did stories set in World War II, for example, that might reference the classic stories. I remember there being a reference to the Six Napoleons and to the Dancing Men and things like that. So there are references, but they're not straight adaptations of the classic stories. And that's not just the Basil Rathbone version, but even today, like we're seeing, we've gotten the Robert Downey Jr. movies, which are their own thing, and the BBC version with Benedict Cumberbatch, which is a modern day telling of the character. I hear that's gotten horrible. I didn't see the last season, but people told me it was terrible. But it started off good. I enjoyed it while it lasted. But what I like about the Jeremy Brett version is that it is straight adaptations of the classic stories. It's not a modern setting. They don't take a whole lot of liberties with it. They are straight adaptations of the classic stories. So they're like the definitive versions of many of the classic stories. Now, granted, they didn't get through all of them, but they did cover many of my favorite ones, like the Speckled Band, the Red-Headed League, the Musgrave Rituals. I love that one. The Dancing Men, so many of the great classic stories. Hound of the Baskervilles, which I love, which there is a version of the Hound of the Baskervilles, which is a straight adaptation starring Basil Rathbone, which was the first time he played the character on film. So I might rewatch that now because I'm getting the itch. But to see those classic stories played out so well in this great series with Jeremy Brett, my favorite Holmes, playing the role, it's just perfect. And what makes Jeremy Brett the best? I guess I'll talk about that. What makes him the best for me is that he has such excitement over his work. Like, he will, if he sees a fingerprint on something, he will lunge at it and jump at it. If he had wings, he'd fly towards it. He's just got this legitimate excitement for his work. And when he doesn't have a case and he has nothing to do, like, he looks so sorrowful and so despondent and so sad. And he plays that up very well. And, when it comes time to be a dick to Watson or Mrs. Hudson, he does that perfectly. He has those little barbs thrown in there as well. And I just love his performance as Holmes. I could have watched it forever. And, my favorite episodes, which are generally like my favorite stories, Scandal in Bohemia, another great one, which introduced us to Irene Adler. There's also The Final Problem, which introduced us to, as Stephen Fry called him, the greatest arch villain to ever arch, Professor Moriarty. I don't know if he's the greatest arch villain to ever arch, but he is probably very much like what I said, Sherlock Holmes' tales are the gold standard for detective stories. Moriarty was kind of the measuring stick for all arch villains that would come after him. And hey, proof's in the pudding. He became one of the top villains in Star Trek: The Next Generation decades later. He's such a classic character. He was able to become a villain in a science fiction show. That's how great Moriarty is. And he was only featured in the one story. That's the thing. Like in the original works, he was only in The Final Problem, and that was it. And alluded to in other ones, but really it's The Final Problem where is the only one he really gets focused on. But he's considered such an iconic character, and it shows how good that story is, to be honest. And Irene Adler, same thing. People think of her as like this major love interest for Sherlock, which she wasn't in her one story. But Scandal in Bohemia is one of the best ones, and she was the major focal point of that. So she's become like much greater and grander in other adaptations, and in the lore of Sherlock Holmes, she's become much bigger. And that speaks to how strong that one story really was. So, the Granada series, Sherlock Holmes, starring Jeremy Brett and David Warner, is my favorite adaptation of Sherlock Holmes. It is terrific. It is wonderful. I've watched it in its entirety several times. It's one of my favorite it is my favorite adaptation of Sherlock Holmes. And if you're a Sherlock fan like I am, I highly recommend this. It is wonderful. Although if you are a big Sherlock fan like I am, you've probably already watched this and I'm wasting my breath. But I wanted to come on here and fanboy a little bit for one of my all-time favorite fictional characters, and one of my personal favorite version of that character adapted for the screen. Small screen, but still. I love this Sherlock Holmes series. It's great. It's wonderful, and I highly recommend it. Now let's continue with another show that has a British flavor to it. The Black Adder, which I was able to watch in its entirety thanks to Hulu. This was a rewatch for me, of course, because I'm a big fan of Black Adder, and I was really happy to go back and rewatch it thanks to Hulu. And this is a very unique piece of comedic history. I think people associate Rowan Atkinson more from Mr. Bean, especially here stateside. But while I do enjoy Mr. Bean, and the Christmas special is great, and I watch it almost every year, Black Adder fit my sensibilities a little bit better with its dry sarcasm and that type of humor, which I really enjoy, and I thought Rowan played that to perfection. He was the perfect centerpiece for mean, nasty, dry sarcasm in an insane world where everybody else is kind of a clown. And I really loved how the series played off. There were four, they call them series instead of seasons, but really, 4 seasons. And it's not the same characters all following one story. It's the same characters being placed in different periods in history with each series, which I really enjoy because it gives each series its own different flavor, its own different circumstances, and its own different opportunities for humor. Unfortunately, the weakest one is the first one, which looks the best from a production value standpoint. The sets and everything look amazing, and they really capture the medieval setting really well. It's set in the time of like King Richard III and that type of stuff. But unfortunately, the jokes don't really land most of the time. Rowan Atkinson himself would admit this, and the people that worked on the show would admit this. It's just they didn't find their voice yet with the first series. The second series came with like a decrease in production values, but an increase in the humor. And it's probably my favorite of the 4 series because it was the one where, again, they really found their voice and what the comedy was going to be all about. In particular, this was the one that really developed the relationship between Blackadder and Baldric, which were in a weird way kind of like the Pinky and the Brain of live action, where you've got this really kind of egotistical, sarcastic one who's smarter than everyone else in the room, and you've got this idiot who's Probably thinks higher of himself than he probably should because he's so stupid. But Baldrick's great. I love him. I have a cunning plan, and I love the guy. And their whole relationship to me makes the 3 seasons that followed the original Blackadder series. And it's great. And it's funny. I remember watching Fox Kids when I was like 12 or 13 or something. There was a show called Mad Jack the Pirate, which nobody remembers. But watching that show, I was like, this is like Blackadder. It's animated Blackadder. That's basically what it was, because it had a Blackadder who was Mad Jack. It had a Baldrick who was like his first mate, which was like a giant rat. I forget his name. But it felt very much like Blackadder, and I don't think anybody remembers it, unfortunately. But I remember liking it at that age. It was on at the same period of Fox Kids when the Godzilla series was on, so I watched both pretty much every Saturday, and it was fun times while it lasted. But like I said, I feel like Blackadder 2 is where they really found their voice and created these really funny scenarios in the time of Queen Elizabeth. And one of the reasons I think Blackadder 2 is my favorite is because Queen Elizabeth, played beautifully by Miranda Richardson, is super, super, super funny. She plays that role to the absolute hilt, and I think she's great. And Stephen Fry's in it, and he's great, and Hugh Laurie's in it, and he's great. It's really funny to see a young Hugh Laurie featured in this. But his time to shine, his time to shine would be in Blackadder III, which is set in the late 18th century, early 19th century, and where he's kind of this foppish prince that Blackadder finds himself in the service of. And Baldrick is there as well. And again, I don't like it as much as Blackadder 2, but I still think it's really, really funny. And I think Hugh Laurie was kind of the shining star in that one. And again, they take full advantage of the setting. And that's the other thing, like the Blackadder 2, what Blackadder 2, Blackadder the Third, and Blackadder Goes Forth do that the first one didn't really do, they take full advantage of the set piece or the time period that they're set in and maximize the comedic impact of those settings. And that's something the first series struggled with, and I think the other 3 do really, really well. And that concludes with Blackadder Goes Forth, which I think is the second best out of all of them. And this one is set in World War I. And all of the main characters, Blackadder, Baldrick, and Hugh Laurie are all serving in the British Army during World War I. And again, some great humor, and it's probably the most unique setting out of the 4, mainly because it is set in the 20th century, so it's a little bit more familiar to me. Not that I grew up in that time period, obviously, but it seems a little bit more relatable because it is so much closer to our time than all the other ones are. And so it has that going for it, I think. And I should point out the ending is actually well remembered, and deservedly so, because that was when they kind of dropped the humor and kind of gave a bittersweet, somber ending, as all the characters were pretty much on their way to die, like march in the battle and basically die. So, that ending is really well remembered. It's like, oh man, this really super funny show ends on like this huge, like kind of somber note, and that was really interesting. And I think it works beautifully. But if you had to twist my arm, I would say Blackadder 2 for its jokes, for Miranda Richardson as Queen Elizabeth, and for really establishing the relationship between Blackadder and Baldrick, who always has a cunning plan. I thought Blackadder 2 was my personal favorite of the bunch, and it's just terrific. But Blackadder as a whole is great, and I also highly recommend checking out the Christmas special, which I will say is probably the greatest clip show of all time. I typically hate clip shows, but this Christmas special provided a point for it where it's a very unique take on A Christmas Carol, and that's all I'll say about it. But Blackadder, I highly recommend it. If you have Hulu, you can watch it. I'm pretty sure it's still on Hulu, but it's very, very good. I really enjoyed it. It was really great to go back and rewatch it because it really makes me appreciate the kind of comedic talent that Rowan Atkinson can be. He's not just a one-hit wonder with Mr. Bean. He's got a lot more range as a comedic talent. And all the great talents that are featured in this thing, I think, are great. It's just a wonderful piece of comedic history, and I think it's definitely worth a watch. Another show I rewatched while in quarantine is one that really takes me back to my middle school years, and that would be Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Now, you know me. I like monsters. I like spooky shit. So this is something that was right up my alley. It's like, okay, a woman goes around hunting vampires. I mean, like, yeah, that's kind of my jam right there. And yeah, I really enjoyed the show. I didn't see the movie with from like the early 90s with Christy Swanson, I think, played the role in that one. I didn't see that until years and years later. I didn't know there was a movie until years and years later, but I did see this show when it was out at the time on WB, and I think eventually it got moved to UPN. Now, but I will say this was both a rewatch and a first-time viewing for me in a sense, where I watched the show originally up through season 5. Something happens at the end of season 5 that let me think, okay, the show's done, I'm cutting it off, it's done. Not that I was angry at it, it was just like, I didn't want to have the ending ruined in a sense, and there's no other way to say it without spoiling it, so I'm just going to say it. So if you haven't seen the show and you don't want it to be spoiled, just shut the video off right now. But at the end of season 5, Buffy is killed. She sacrifices herself to save her sister and the entire universe as a result. To me, that was an acceptable ending. I was like, okay, Buffy's dead. That's it. We're done. If they want to continue the show, they can get a new Slayer. And that was kind of my attitude at that point. And I was worried with the future the next season, which I believe, if memory serves me right, that was the move to UPN. If memory serves me right. I was worried. One of my major pet peeves in writing is whenever they undo death. Because it seemed like ever since Superman came back to life in the comics, actually, I'll even predate that. Probably when Optimus Prime came back in Transformers Generation 1. Ever since then, it started this trend of like, all right, we can kill a character and it'll be a big deal, but then we can always bring them back. We can always bring them back. And to me, it becomes like a weakness in the writing where it's like, well, you kind of lose the stakes if you can just kind of bullshit your way around it and bring a character back after you've killed them. DBZ made a joke out of it to where it's like that show almost had no stakes because it was like, dude, who cares if anybody dies because they can just as easily be brought back. I mean, I think everybody on DBZ got killed at least twice over. It felt like. It just became a running gag after a while. So, to me, I was like, okay, season 5, we're done. We got an ending. I'm cool with it. I don't need to see anything that happens after this. And now that I'm stuck in quarantine, I thought, okay, you know what? It's been over 20 years. And I thought, yeah, let's see how season 6 and 7 turned out. Let's see how it all went. And season 6 was terrible. I'm not going to lie. Season 6 was terrible. And I felt justified in my decision skipping it initially. Season 7 was much better. I was like, okay, that was a little bit more satisfying of an ending. And I think that ended at a good enough place. But going back over the entire show, I really like the idea of this high schooler who's trying to balance like a normal life and hang out with her friends and all this other stuff. But she's got this destiny and this moniker of the Slayer that's just thrusted upon her because she's destined to be the Slayer. And now she's got to balance like normal work life, school, and academics and all that stuff, and balance it with nighttime vampire hunting. And I'm like, this is kind of neat. And it's kind of got that like, old style superhero, without like a mask and a cape, obviously, but it's that old like secret identity type thing. It's like, that feels like classic in a sense. And in a weird way, I think the show kind of started, or at least created the formula that the DC CW shows would follow, where it's like you've got the main hero, and then that person surrounds him or herself with a group of friends that fill different functions. Like you got the tech person, and you got the sarcastic person, you've got the mentor character. I mean, Arrow. You look at Arrow, and you look at Buffy, what Buffy was doing years before, and it's like, oh my god, it's like this show ripped off Buffy. It's like it kind of did, and Flash, Supergirl, all those shows, and I think Buffy deserves a lot of credit for kind of creating that whole feel and formula, like that like teenager superhero show that we would see in that would become somewhat of a staple for like WB and the UPN, and I guess now the CW. And in regards to those supporting characters, Buffy I really liked. I really liked her as a central figure. I think Sarah Michelle Gellar was great in the role. I think she brought a lot of like sarcasm and charm, and again played the role really, really well. I will say this: some of her outfits were appalling. looking back and I'm like, oh my god, the fashion of the late 90s did not age well. There was one episode where she was wearing something that, it looked like a blue tube top, but I don't even know how to describe it. It looked like somebody was trying to make a tube top out of window curtains and then just gave up halfway through and put it on anyway. That's what it looked like. I'm like, that is ghastly. That thing is terrible. But there's a lot of that when you go back and look at the show. I'm like, oh god, this fashion has not aged well. Like I remember back in the late 90s, every guy I knew had to get the frosty tips. We came back one summer and all the guys had frosty tips. And I was like, and I was the one guy that was kind of like, you all look like idiots. Are you aware that you look like idiots? And I'm sure every single one of those kids looks back on it now and they feel embarrassed. So it's the fashion was very weird back then, but it's also kind of funny to watch a show like this and look at what the fashion looked like back then. But going over the other characters, Buffy's great and I love her and she's enough of an anchor to keep the show interesting. Willow is solid as like the best friend, smart person of the group who also gets into witchcraft, which bites him in the butt in season 6, but whatever. Xander, who's supposed to be like the funny guy of the group, I hated him in those early episodes. Like rewatching this, I'm like, man, I really do not remember hating Xander this much, but I really want to punch him right in his goddamn face. He got better, and by season 3 I was more on board with it, but those early episodes, it was kind of rough. But he ended up being the star of one of my favorite episodes, which was the one where he went off on his own adventure while Buffy and the rest of the gang was taking care of this apocalyptic threat. And he had like his own side adventure that was focused on it. There was this much grander story going on in the background that we didn't know about. And I thought that was super funny. And I'd seen that ripped off a couple of times since. I remember Justice League did a similar thing with Booster Gold. And I thought it's pretty funny. It's a funny idea. And I thought that was one of the better episodes in the series. Giles I like as the mentor character. I think he's really good. Dawn, the sister who would come on in season 5, I believe. She's okay. I could see a lot of people viewing her as kind of a Scrappy-Doo. And kind of like being kind of a symbol that the show had jumped the shark or something. But I didn't think she was that bad, and it gave Buffy a little bit more of a motivation for what she did at the end of the season. And I like her mom a lot. I think her mom was like a really fun character. They got some emotional gut punches out of her when it came around. The love interest Angel, who, by the way, I've never watched that series, his spin-off show, Angel. I've never watched it because I thought he was so boring. I would never watch a show starring him. Now, people have told me the show was good. I never watched it because I was like, but he sucks. That was literally my attitude. Even back then, I was like, yeah, but he's terrible. But, whatever. Vampire love interest, blah, 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 whatever. Who else am I missing? Cordelia, who is kind of the snobby bitch in the high school seasons. She was kind of fun for what she was. And, Charisma Carpenter is very easy on the eyes as well. So that was nice. But then you got Faith, played by Eliza Dushku, who I completely forgot how hot she was. I was like, oh man, this girl is nuts. And here's the thing. Buffy's the type of girl, once you get to know her and you get past all of her obvious problems and you understand all of her problems, she's the type of girl you're like, I wouldn't mind. Yeah, I could see myself putting a ring on that. It's like getting into like a, dating her a long time or something. Faith is the kind of girl that you have fun with for one night, and then you run like hell because she's crazy as shit. But that one night would be amazing. But kind of this like badass rebel slayer that you get, and I don't want to spoil all the things they did with her, but I thought she was great, and again, great casting. I would have liked for her to get a spin-off show, to be perfectly honest, over Angel, but again, people have told me that show was good, so maybe that'll be the next thing I jump into, who knows, but you also get Spike, who starts off as a bad guy and then slowly goes through a redemption arc, which he was a lot of fun and very interesting throughout the course of the series to watch his development, although it did kind of go into some terrible places in season 6, where, which I don't want to get into the specifics of it, but season 6 was not great, minus one episode that I really liked, which involved Buffy in a asylum, but throughout the show, I'm kind of amazed that with a concept like this, they did a really good job of keeping the steam into the show creatively from season to season, as it didn't feel like it was the exact same thing every single season. There was that basic formula of introduce a threat, Buffy's got to deal with it, and there's a big bad at the season that she has to fight, which they kind of kept that going throughout the course of the series. And some were better than others, like, you get vampire bad guys. Season 4 had like a Frankenstein monster as the big bad. Spike was the big bad at one point and then redeemed himself. Then in season 6, you get 3 dorks who were so lame and non-threatening that they just had to kind of turn somebody else into the big bad at the very end. I didn't like season 6. I didn't like season 6. But season 7, again, kind of was all about everybody coming together and like putting aside any kind of bad feelings and coming together against this great threat. It was very interesting in how they pulled it off. Again, don't want to spoil too much, but I think the series holds up very well, even though it's got that like 90s time capsule feel to it, where it's like, oh my god, some of these outfits are super, super dated. Some of this dialogue is super, super dated, but at the same time, I think that gives it kind of a charm that it's as dated as it is in some places, and the story, I think, still resonates and still works, and there's themes and elements to it that still hold up very well today, and I like most of the characters. I like most of them. Xander took a while to get used to. But I do like most of the characters, and I think most of the episodes are a lot of fun, especially when they kind of leaned into comedy. I think some of my more favorite episodes are kind of the goofier ones, like the musical and the one where everybody has to be silent. That one was a pretty solid one. But I think my favorite episode overall was the prom episode. I think the show really hit its peak seasons 3 and 4, which was the last year in high school and the first year in college. I think that was where the show was really at its best. And it's before Dawn showed up, and it's before they undid Buffy's death, which everybody knew they were going to do, but whatever. Season 3 and 4 is where they really, I felt like, they built up to everything very nicely to the end of her high school years, and then the first year in college I thought was very, very good. So rewatching it, that was the stuff I enjoyed the most anyway. And the prom episode in particular, I think, gave me kind of like the... I don't want to, again, I'm trying not to spoil things for those that haven't watched it, but there's a moment in the prom episode where I went like, aw. And it felt like the entire show had been building up to that moment as well. And it was genuinely kind of sweet. So, I think a lot of fun is to be had out of this show. I think it's a very interesting look back at what television was like back then. And it's it's a perfectly solid and entertaining show all around. I think it's obviously built up a sizable fan base and had a lot of people that adored it back then. It was a very popular show back in my youth. And people were still watching it even after I gave up on it. And I was like, because I felt like I got an ending, so I was completely okay jumping off board. But even watching the last 2 seasons for the first time, I was like, okay, season 6 was a little rough. Season 7 was pretty good and got a satisfying ending out of it. So overall, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is something I highly recommend, and especially if you were around at that time and you probably remember the show, it's one that's like, go back and give it a rewatch. I think it's worth it. Since I've already mentioned superhero shows, let's talk about one from the 90s that I also remembered watching. A Superman series by the name of Lois and Clark, The New Adventures of Superman. Now, I should mention that I never watched Smallville. I know a lot of people are nostalgic for that show, and that's kind of the definitive Superman live-action series for a lot of people, but I never watched it, so I have no nostalgia or feelings for it. I don't know why I didn't watch it. I just never got around to watching it, and maybe that's another one for the list that I should probably check out. But this is the one that I remember. Lois and Clark is the one that I watched back in the 90s. Not religiously. It's one that I caught every once in a while. But I was kind of... this was a point in my life where I was kind of like getting over my childhood hatred of Superman. For whatever reason as a child, like really young child, I had it in my head that Superman sucked and I hated him. I don't know why. And maybe it's because I was a Batman fan and I just like, Batman's better. Or what, and that was my attitude. But as I grew up and I got exposed to the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, and I think the animated series from the 90s had maybe started up by this point. I really enjoyed that. And I started to warm up to Superman more and more. And now I consider myself a fan. I'm like, Superman is great. Why am I being such a dick, not liking this guy? And one of those shows that kind of helped ease me into liking Superman was Lois and Clark, starring Dean Cain as Superman and Terry Hatcher as Lois Lane. She's most famous for Desperate Housewives, but this is the show that I remember her for. I should also note that she was also a Bond girl. She was in Tomorrow Never Dies. Not the main one, but she was in that movie, and just thought I would bring that up. But I'll always remember her as Lois Lane from this series. But rewatching the show, it's kind of amazing to me how like kind of cheesy the show is, because I remember taking it seriously. When I was younger, I remember like being like super invested in the drama and everything. You watch the show and it's obviously kind of played for laughs and it's kind of corny and cheesy. And I think that kind of gives it a little bit of charm. It's almost got like an old-fashioned flair to it. And the show isn't so much about the superhero exploits of Superman, even though that is a part of it. It's really more about like the romantic comedy aspects and the relationship between Lois and Clark, with an heightened emphasis on Lois Lane as a character and her relationship to both Clark Kent and Superman, and all the bumps in their little road until they ultimately get married and start having a family and all those other kinds of things. And it's actually kind of weirdly sweet and charming in a way. Again, it's not like the most action-packed superhero show you've ever seen, and it's not because that's not really the goal for most of it, even though Lex Luthor is in the show. Where one of the weirdest parts of the show is where Lois Lane almost marries Lex Luthor, and I'm like, but why? He's awful. And it's kind of obvious that he's awful. Come on, Lois, you seem smarter than that. But yeah, the more romantic comedy aspect, and Clark trying to balance his feelings for Lois, and Lois trying to balance her feelings for both Superman and Clark, who for most of the show she doesn't know is the same person. All that's kind of weirdly charming and sweet in a way, and it feels like it's cut from almost like an expansion on the relationship between Lois and Superman in the first Richard Donner Superman movie starring Christopher Reeve and Margot Kidder. And this feels like kind of an earnest continuation of that. And it captures a lot of the elements that I like about Superman, his good-natured, self, and how he's like the ultimate good guy, and he's like a sweet farm boy from Kansas that's trying to live the big city life, but he's also an ultra-powered god man that's trying to live like a normal person, has like the wants and feelings of any normal human being. Those types of things. And I gotta say, I really like Terry Hatcher as Lois Lane in the show, because she's so like determined to be the best reporter in the world that at times she almost gets like crazy with it, and not in a way like in previous incarnations or even concurrent incarnations, because I think the animated Superman series was going on at the same time. Dana Delaney was the voice of Lois Lane in the animated series, and they portray her as like a dedicated but competent reporter. And Margot Kidder is very good at Lois Lane, but portrayed largely as a competent, dedicated, super dedicated reporter. And Terry Hatcher has that quality as well, but they use it for comedic effect, which I really like. And sometimes she goes way over the top, and I think it's super funny at times. So, but again, this show does have more of a comedic edge to it at points, even though there are those like kind of heightened comic book type of stories in there. We do probably the best villain in the series is the Tempest, and probably the most well-known villain from the series. And whenever he shows up, that typically yields some great stuff because it involves time travel and all sorts of other craziness going on. And they work in a few of Superman's like key enemies. Their take on the Toyman was interesting, I thought. As a fan of the Jeffersons, it was interesting to see Sherman Hemsley and his co-star from the Jeffersons, who played his wife, Isabel Sanford, that's her name. See them working together in this. I was like, that's an interesting take. I think Morgan Fairchild did a cameo in the show. So they got some like interesting guest stars in there too. It was pretty fun. And Denise Crosby also played a villain at one point in the series. So again, there's a lot of like really cool, interesting guest stars that are woven into this. And overall, it's like a super fun series. I don't think that this is going to be for everybody. I think a lot of people kind of look at the kind of cheesier nature of it and kind of like instantly kind of write it off. But if you're looking for something a little bit sillier and a little bit sweeter and a little bit more like kind of, again, romantic comedy type of style superhero show, I think this one is perfectly valid as that. My only real major problem is that the show ends on a cliffhanger, and that obviously never got resolved because the show got canceled, which is unfortunate. Yeah, but overall, like Lois and Clark, like I said, it's not for everybody, and I think fans of shows like, perhaps like Smallville, I don't know, again, I never watched Smallville, that want a more straightforward superhero type show will be disappointed in this. But if you're looking for something a little bit, like I said, a little bit sillier, a little bit more, campier and feel good, and something more in the realm of a romantic comedy, I think this show's a perfectly valid and perfectly entertaining one. And now let's talk about a show that's a little bit more recent. Better Call Saul, the prequel series to Breaking Bad. And I've been watching the show. It's one of the few shows that I watch the night of or close to the night of anymore, because with everything being on demand and DVR and all this other stuff being what it is, normally it's easier to just wait for a show, or, like in the case of some shows, I'll wait for the season to drop on Netflix or something like that. But with Better Call Saul, it's like, no, I'm watching that night of. Because it's Better Call Saul, and it's legitimately probably my favorite show on TV, and it has been for the last few years. Yes, there is the connection to Breaking Bad, which is arguably the greatest show of all time, but I feel like this show manages to avoid many of the pitfalls of several prequel pieces of media. Star Trek, I'm looking at you. Star Wars, I'm definitely looking at you. Although their sequels didn't turn out so great either. Like Star Trek at least had some solid sequels, sequel shows or anything. But Better Call Saul, at its core, even though, and I think even if you've never seen Breaking Bad, and there are a lot of callbacks and a lot of setups for Breaking Bad, which are probably some of the weaker elements of the show, but where it really hits home is that at the end of the day, it's not a science fiction show, it's not a fantasy show, so there's not a lot of crazy shit going on. It doesn't rely heavily on sex or violence, although there is some violence, and this season 5 kind of upped it. At the end of the day, it's just about people going to work. And I love it, because they get so much drama and so much character development out of it that it's amazing. And if I had never watched Breaking Bad, I would still love the show. It's that good. And it's great to see Jimmy McGill transform into the Saul Goodman that we see in Breaking Bad. And all the things that happen on the way to leading him down that road. And season 4 concluded with a moment that kind of shocked me, as his girlfriend Kim, a fellow lawyer, basically saw him use his dead brother's name to get his license to be a lawyer back and to be reinstated. And she looked absolutely shocked by it. And one thing I will say about this series, Bob Odenkirk, who played the character in Breaking Bad, reprising the role here, he has been absolutely terrific, and he is a force of nature throughout the series. But I gotta throw some love to Rhea Seehorn, who plays Kim, who's his girlfriend, and she has been absolutely amazing and just continuously gets better and better. I think she's been a great asset to the series and making it work, especially in season 5, as we see, because the big through line in season 5, for me anyway, was Jimmy getting further and further tied into unsavory characters that he shouldn't be tied to. Any sane person wouldn't want to be tied to, but he gets closer and closer into the dark side of things. And as we see in the series, Kim gets a lot closer to it too, which ends on a moment that legitimately disappointed me in a good way, where I was emotionally invested. I'm like, oh no, Kim, don't do it, no. But the show's got me completely hook, line, and sinker, and has pretty much from day one. I think Better Call Saul is an absolutely fantastic series. I think it's done an amazing job of both living up to Breaking Bad and also separating itself from it, where it's able to stand on its own. I think it's funny, it's smart, it's emotional in the right places. It is an absolute terrific show. Every actor in it brings their A game. I think it's terrifically well written all the way through, and it is definitely a worthy successor to Breaking Bad. Some people say it's better than Breaking Bad. I won't make a final decision until Better Call Saul is concluded, which I think it's getting close to concluding. I would expect, I haven't read anything, but I would expect the next season to probably be the last one, and that's okay. You don't need to. One of the best things that Breaking Bad ever did was end after 5. It was like, dude, sometimes it's best to just walk away from the table hot, Bates Motel, which is another show I might review at some point, but that was a show that I got super invested in. And the last 2 seasons of that show are killer. It got 5 seasons, and And that's all it needed. It didn't need to be any longer than that. So sometimes it's better to walk away than to stick around for, like, God knows how long. Like, somebody was telling me that Supernatural is finally ending, and I was like, that show was around like 15 years ago. That's insane to me. But I've never watched it, so I can't judge it. But I can't imagine that show staying interesting for 15 years. It's like, but again, who knows? Maybe I'm the crazy one. But I think Better Call Saul is absolutely fantastic, and it's one that comes highly recommended for me. And there's that pessimistic side of me that keeps waiting for a drop off. And it didn't happen with Breaking Bad, and it hasn't happened yet with Better Call Saul. I think this season was arguably the best one of the bunch, especially advancing the relationship between Jimmy and Kim, and some of the shocking moments involved in that, and also some of the partnerships going on between Jimmy and Mike, also from Breaking Bad, who gets his own prequel storyline throughout the course of the series. And I think their partnerships in this season were the strongest they've been throughout the entire series. So there's a lot of great, tense, dramatic moments, especially in the last couple of episodes in this season. So season 5 of Better Call Saul, very, very good. The show continues to be great, and here's hoping it all builds to a great and satisfying conclusion. All right, now we're going into the realm of animated shows, and the first one we're going to do is one that I loved as a kid, and it ended up being the first thing that I watched on Disney Plus when I got the subscription. Gargoyles, my favorite show from the Disney afternoon block, and a show that I continuously come back to every few years or so. And I'm amazed at how well it holds up. It is such a great show, and because of Disney Plus, I was able to watch the show in its entirety, even in the third season, which I never saw before, the Goliath Chronicles, which is not quite as good as the first 2 seasons, but we'll get to that in a little bit. Gargoyles is a series that when I talk to people about it, and they ask me what it's about and ask for a description of it, I typically say something along the lines of, it has a style similar to Batman the Animated Series, which I'm sure inspired some of this. It has a premise that's similar to Ninja Turtles, and it's got themes and elements and kind of a personality similar to that of X-Men. And in doing all of that and combining all those different things, it creates its own interesting lore that sets it apart from everything else. Gargoyles is flipping great, and if you're looking for something to watch on Disney Plus, I highly recommend this. I think it's really good, especially if you have kids that are a little bit older, getting into that like 9, 10, 11 years, because that was when I watched it, and I absolutely fell in love with it. And I'm happy to report that the show definitely holds up. It's one of the few shows that I've watched in my lifetime where, and I kind of talked about it a little bit with Buffy, but in this show, there's no character in the main cast that I dislike. Goliath, who's the leader of the Gargoyles, is awesome, especially with Keith David doing the voice. And that's another thing, the voice acting in the show is top-notch. I know it's been joked about that many members of Star Trek, The Next Generation, are featured voices in this. Riker's in it, and Deanna Troy's in it, and Data's in it in a bit part, in one of the best twists in any TV show that I've ever seen. Don't want to spoil it too much, but he's in it as well, and Michael Dorn plays a few bit parts, a couple of characters in it. So, yeah, I mean, that's there, but, I mean, they're very talented actors, and the voices are great, and Marina Sirtis, in particular, does the voice of Demona, who's one of the main villains, and she is absolutely fantastic. And Riker, the actor who plays Riker, his name is escaping me at the moment, but he's great too. He plays Xanatos, who is one of the all-time greatest arch rivals of all time, because he's almost not a villain the way he presents himself. He is so non-cliched in his villainy that when he does act cliched in his villainy, he jokes about it. It's like, how am I doing? This is the first time my first real stab at cliched villainy. How am I doing? And but Xanatos is great because he's basically just a super rich guy with interests, and he sees the Gargoyles not necessarily as enemies, but as tools that he could potentially use to his own advantage. And he's not out for revenge. He's not motivated necessarily by world domination or anything like that. He's just a rich guy that wants more money. That's basically it. And the Gargoyles either help or hinder him, depending on the situation and how much he's manipulated said situation. He's a very interesting character and one that I really enjoy. But going back to the good guy side of things, you have Goliath, who's the leader of the Gargoyles, and then you have all the other ones that adopt names based on New York, which is the setting. And of course, New York is always a great setting to use. I don't know why, it just is. New York is just a perfect setting. And you get Brooklyn, Lexington, Broadway, Hudson, who's probably my favorite outside of Goliath, and the Goliath guard dog, or the Gargoyle guard dog, who's Bronx. And most of the Gargoyles are great. There's the trio, Brooklyn, Broadway, and Lexington, who are kind of like more comedy relief. But they do things with their characters that are really interesting. Especially Broadway, who has one of the most memorable episodes, shall we say. It's an episode about gun safety, and that's all I'm going to say. It's one of the most shocking episodes I watched of all the animated shows I watched as a kid, to say the least. And he's like the goofiest one of the bunch, and for him to like be used in such a heavy episode was really remarkable, and it really works. Hudson's great because he's like the old veteran type guy, voiced by Ed Asner, and he's terrific. And basically what it's about is that these gargoyles existed in like medieval times, and a spell was cast on them that permanently set them as stone forever until the curse was lifted. Xanatos in present day lifts the curse, and the gargoyles are free and roaming around in modern day times, and have to deal with all the prejudice against monsters roaming around the city and all this other stuff while they save the world and stop bad guys and all that other fun stuff. So again, a little bit of X-Men, a little bit of Ninja Turtles going on. And if you're going to do a Ninja Turtles, you got to have an April O'Neil character, and that's where Elisa Mazza comes in. She's kind of the gateway between the human world and the gargoyle world, where she befriends Goliath very early after his awakening, and she's able to kind of help fit the gargoyles into modern times while also keeping their secret and protecting them during the day, because they turn to stone during the day. And that's another aspect I really liked about this show, is that there was always this dramatic element, is like once it turns daytime, they're basically helpless. They're just stone statues. And that's how most of their people were killed centuries ago. The Vikings raided their castle during the daytime and basically smashed all the gargoyles to bits. And this setup creates a lot of great stories, a lot of great drama. There's some great villains thrown in, like the Pack, who are like these Power Ranger-esque superheroes that turns out to be like thugs and assassins working for Xanatos, and they have a few battles with the gargoyles. We get Demona, who I referenced earlier, voiced by Marina Sirtis, who is absolutely amazing. She's like the Magneto of the series, where she's the gargoyle that's like, no, we need to destroy humanity because they hate us. And what she doesn't realize is that all the pain in her life, she's basically caused herself. She's her own worst enemy. But she's, in a weirdly, like, the most tragic character in the show in a lot of ways. And very, very interesting character to watch, and one that I really stuck with me after the show. She might be my favorite character in the series, because she's just so interesting and so great. And then they do a bunch of things where they will work in old myths and legends and even the works of William Shakespeare, which I must have been 9 years old when the show came out. I mean, I wasn't familiar with Shakespeare at that point. And they're referencing things like Othello and Macbeth, who, by the way, Macbeth comes in as a character, and he's one of my favorite characters. He's great. He's kind of almost like a badass bounty hunter character, the way they present him. And he's got interesting ties to the lore of the gargoyles and everything, and especially to Demona. And yeah, so he's great, but they work in Macbeth, Othello, Oberon comes in from Midsummer Night's Dream, and how they tackle that is so fascinating and so interesting how they do that. It's really, really great, and I love it. And I won't say that Gargoyles got me interested in Shakespeare, but when I did get into Shakespeare in high school, memories of this show helped me understand the material a little better. Like, it was like, okay, these are things that I remembered from my childhood, so I'm able to kind of it helped ease me into Shakespeare, I'll say that much. I didn't come out of Gargoyles wanting to read Shakespeare, but when I did eventually read Shakespeare, my memories of Gargoyles helped me understand the material. And that's great. I think it's good to educate kids, even if subtly educating them and using literature to influence the stories that you're telling. I think it's brilliant. And Gargoyles is an absolutely terrific show for 2 seasons. The 3rd season, called The Goliath Chronicles, was when the show was moved to ABC, I believe, like the Saturday morning block. And a lot of fans of the series don't like season 3, and I can understand why. It had a whole new writing staff. and it kind of shows. It felt like, not that it was bad, it felt like a bunch of writers trying to play catch-up with understanding the material themselves. So it almost felt like all the buildup that had happened throughout the first 2 seasons had kind of come to a halt a little bit in season 3, and the quality of the series just wasn't up to par with what we had seen previously. And that's not to say season 3 is bad. It's just not as good, and I kind of would have preferred it, because season 2 ends in a way that works as a pretty solid series finale. Leaves the door open for more, and a lot happens throughout the course of season 2. It's crazy. But it ends in a way that's satisfying. I think that could have been the end of the series. Season 2, a lot happens. Like I said, there's the biggest thing that happens is the World Traveler storyline, where Goliath, Elisa, Bronx, and a new character, Angela, a new gargoyle, who I'm not going to explain who she is for the sake of preserving spoilers, end up traveling the world and get transported all over the world in different locations to help certain people out in certain situations. And they're basically lost in this seemingly never-ending journey until they get home. And all of those individual adventures are great. I wish they had spent a little bit more time cutting back and forth between the World Traveler stuff and what's going on in New York, because we go through some pretty long stretches where we do not see what is going on in New York at all, which benefits one episode towards the end of the storyline. But yeah, there's so many great side characters and so many great things that happen that I highly recommend the show. It's a great show. It's just a really, really good show. I think at the time it wasn't like a massive hit, because I think it got swallowed up by Power Rangers. It was one of the shows that kind of got like put up against Power Rangers. If you got put up against Power Rangers, you were going to get eaten alive. But I think Gargoyles has built up like its own cult following, and it has its fans, and with good reason. I think it's a hell of a show. I think some people may have missed out on it back in the day because it was on at an undesirable time of the day when they were up against Power Rangers during the height of its popularity, which is unfortunate. But if you like action adventure, if you like darker stuff, if you like a little bit more complicated material, I think this is a great show to watch. If you want to introduce your kids to something a little bit more advanced than most kids shows, I think Gargoyles is a good one to go with. It's my personal favorite show from the Disney Afternoon block, which is saying a lot, because I really like a lot of those shows. I love DuckTales. DuckTales was one of my favorites when I was really, really young. I love Chip and Dale. I love Tailspin. I love Darkwing Duck. You know, great shows. But Gargoyles is like head and shoulders above those. I think it's an amazing show and definitely worth a watch. Speaking of the Disney Afternoon, let's talk about a reboot of one of those beloved cartoons that I watched as a kid. The reboot of DuckTales, which I've finally gotten around to watching the first 2 seasons. The 3rd season is underway right now. I haven't caught up on it. But let me just say this. Of all the cartoons that I watched as a kid, that when I was really, really young, like the He-Mans, the Transformers, the Thundercats, DuckTales, Ninja Turtles, all those. I've seen a lot of reboots of those shows. Some have worked. Some have not worked at all. Thundercats Roar, looking at you. So it's been a mixed bag. Some of them work, some of them haven't. DuckTales is very close to the top of the list of the best ones. And it's certainly the best one out there right now, without question. It is so good. And they did, to Disney's credit, you know, and I knock them a lot, especially with how they handled Star Wars, but this new DuckTales is really, really good, and they hit it out of the park, as far as I'm concerned. I had my issues with Season 1, but they were mostly nitpicky. And then I think in Season 2, they either fixed it or made the things that I didn't like and tweaked them in a way that made them work. So it's overall a very faithful adaptation while also updating it and keeping it modern so it doesn't feel like a complete rehash. And I think a lot of things that they do right, not only do they kind of reference the original show, but they also reference the Carl Barks comics a little bit more, which is nice to see. That's why Donald Duck is included more, because if you read the old Carl Barks, Uncle Scrooge comics, which I adore, by the way, if you read those, the key relationship in those comics is Uncle Scrooge and Donald. That's the key relationship. And in the original DuckTales show, Donald was largely relegated to being just a guest star. And unfortunately, Donald was more in the background that I would have liked in season 1, which they definitely fixed in season 2. And to see like Donald Duck and Scrooge McDuck going on adventures together is just wonderful, because I love those characters. They are my 2 favorite Disney characters in print, in TV, in whatever. I love Scrooge McDuck and Donald Duck. I think they're great and terrific, and I absolutely love them. So to get a series that focuses on them again is fantastic. I think it's great. I think it's absolutely great to see. And hopefully kids today get to watch the show and understand why everybody loves Scrooge and Donald so much. And I gotta say, most of the voices are great in this show, especially David Tennant as Scrooge, who had the hardest task of anybody, because to me, the original voice of Scrooge was Alan Young. And he was so good at it that to me it's like, he is Uncle Scrooge. Nobody else is Uncle Scrooge. He is Uncle Scrooge. So for David Tennant to come in, voice the character, and do as well as he has, with such lofty expectations, filling in for Alan Young, the late, great Alan Young, it's pretty incredible, and I think he does a really good job. Now, Alan Young is still the best Scrooge. It's one of those cases where David Tennant is very good at playing Scrooge. Alan Young is Scrooge. That's how I would describe it. And but he still does a very good job, and I love this version of Scrooge. And there's so many great episodes that I can think about. They did a Christmas episode that was great. They did a wonderful Darkwing Duck episode that blew my socks off and completely went against my expectations. And if you love Darkwing Duck, you absolutely should see that episode. They worked in Don Carnage from TaleSpin, who was my favorite character on TaleSpin, so that was great to see, like a reinvention of Don Carnage. Magica Dispel was brought in, and she was one of the main villains of both the Carl Barks comics and the original DuckTales show. And that was great to see. They did a thing with Donald. I don't want to spoil it, but they did a thing with Donald in season 2 that I absolutely loved and made me love the character even more. They did a Three Caballeros reunion, which I popped for that because Three Caballeros, I watched that movie a lot when I was a kid, so that was cool to see. And they're finding new ways to kind of tweak and do these things. Like Darkwing Duck is not how he was in the original show, but the way they did it was brilliant, I thought, and I really loved how they did that. And apparently, season 3, they're bringing in Chip and Dale and the Rescue Rangers, and they're bringing in Goofy from Goof Troop and all these other things. So it's like the Disney Afternoon shared universe. I wonder if the Gargoyles will pop up in this. That would be weird. But yeah, and like I said, I did have my issues with season 1. In particular, I'm not the biggest fan of how they handled Glomgold. Glomgold is a character that originates from the comics and was in the original show as well. And he's supposed to be Scrooge's evil rival and like Scrooge's equal. And for whatever reason in the show, they made him a blithering idiot. And I'm like, I like the old Glomgold better. But in season 2, they kind of tweaked him in a way. It's like, okay, he's still a blithering idiot, but at least they do things with him that are funny. And I'm like, okay, like there was a scene where he goes to a funeral and he starts twerking over the casket. So it's like, okay, that's kind of funny. I'll give them that. But it's so yeah, even the things that don't work, they find a way to kind of tweak it and make it work. I'll say that as far as reboot, changing old characters. I loved what they did with Doofus, because I hated Doofus in the original show, and their reinvention of him is it completely goes against the original character, but I don't care because the original character sucked. And this is way better. This is way better what they did with him. And I'm trying not to give too much away because there is so much good stuff here. They give Huey, Dewey, and Louie individual personalities rather than how they're typically portrayed as basically being the same character. That's just 3 of the same character, basically. They've kind of fixed that here and given them all individual personalities and did it in a way that works, as opposed to, I remember when Quack Pack tried it, and they made them like 90s kids, and it was so horribly dated that it even back then, it was like, yeah, this isn't going to work. But I think they did a much better job with it here. Webby, who was like the annoying girl character in the original show, like, "Oh, my precious," that type of character, they changed her and made her a little bit more adventurous and fun. One of my issues with season 1 is that I felt like they focused too much on the kids. I wanted more Scrooge and Donald and Launchpad as well. And I felt like they were focusing a little too much on the kids. And I think in season 2 they fixed that by splitting them up a little bit more and having the kids hang around with the adults more. And doing different things with different characters, and I think that worked much better in season 2. But overall, I think that as far as reboots go, this is about as good as you could possibly hope for. And I think if you're a fan of the original DuckTales or you're a fan of the Carl Barks comics, this one is definitely worth a look. If you're like me and you love Scrooge McDuck, which like I said, as far as Disney characters go, him and Donald, they're 1 and 1A. Take your pick over who's number 1 for real. But if you're a fan of those characters, I think the show is definitely worth a watch, and I'm super, super happy with how it's turned out, and I can't wait to start watching season 3. Now that I've talked about Disney animation, let's talk about Cartoon Network and some of their classic shows, including my favorite show that Cartoon Network ever did, Samurai Jack, which I rewatched in its entirety on Hulu, and boy, oh boy, did I have fun with this. Samurai Jack was such a great show when it came out. And it was developed by Genndy Tartakovsky. I hope I pronounced that right. He's known for developing Dexter's Lab, and he also worked on the 2D animated Clone Wars TV show for Star Wars. And his style is so great. And the man is an animation genius, and he doesn't always get the credit that he deserves. But when you look at that resume, and I'm about to put him over even harder when I go into the next show I talk about, but more on that in a bit. But Samurai Jack... I just loved everything about this show, from the stylistic choices that they made to the plot and the setting, which had like kind of it was almost like an old spaghetti western type of story with some kung fu elements and sci-fi elements and some noir elements, and it just combined so many different things that it was naturally appealing to me. And every episode felt like a movie. And I mean that as a compliment. It's kind of like Batman the Animated Series in that regard, where it's like every episode felt cinematic to some degree. The way it was animated and the way it was shot and the way the action was portrayed, it was one of Cartoon Network's most daring and experimental shows. And it worked beautifully during the course of the series. And, of course, if you've ever watched the intro to the show, you know the story. It's about a samurai who has to fight this evil demon that gets unleashed by the name of Aku. And this is in, old, feudal Japan, I think, is the time period. And he's about to defeat Aku with his magic sword that his father bequeathed him. And this is after he's been all over the world training for this moment to defeat Aku. Because if he doesn't defeat Aku, the world will be under Aku's rule. And before he's defeated, Aku... opens up a time portal and sends Samurai Jack forward in time 50 years, or hundreds of years, I'm sorry. Hundreds and hundreds of years. And he's in a future, like this weird, it's almost like the entire world is Mos Eisley from Star Wars. That's the best way I can describe it. Just aliens everywhere and dystopian future, and Aku rules everything because he's an immortal demon. And... that's your setting. And funny thing about Samurai Jack, we never actually learn his real name. Jack is a name that he adopts while he's in the future. And the entire course of the story is about him trying to find a way to get back to the past and defeat Aku before all of this terrible stuff happens. And along the way, he makes friends, makes enemies. On the friend side of things, there's obviously the Scotsman, who's voiced beautifully by Joe DiMaggio. Is just wonderful, wonderful side character. And on the villain side of things, it's a bunch of assassins working for Aku, Damongo being a very memorable one. And it's a terrific show. It is absolutely a terrific show. And it's, like I said, it's action-packed. It's got a great premise, great setup. The voice acting, the two key voice actors are Phil LaMarr as Samurai Jack, who doesn't have a lot of dialogue, but whenever he does talk, it matters and it works. And the real star is Mako as Aku, who steals every scene that he's in. He's absolutely terrific. I love Aku. He's probably my favorite character because Mako just brings so much joy to that character that it's absolutely amazing. Now, the most unfortunate thing about Samurai Jack is that the show got canceled before we could get an ending, so we never got a conclusion to Jack's story. Until a few years ago when Adult Swim announced that they were going to be hosting... They were going to be premiering the final season of Samurai Jack on Adult Swim, developed by Genndy Tartakovsky, returning to his baby, finally getting to finish the story, and we get one last season. And after all those years, to get that final season was so great. And this is the first time I've rewatched the final season. And I think it's great. I think the final season works really, really well. They up the violence to like an insane degree, to where it belonged on something like Adult Swim. And to see Jack really getting super desperate and violent, and the whole story getting super violent. Really, it's like, well, you know, you got to imagine like we were younger when we watched it. Of course, I was a teenager when the original show debuted, but I was watching the show because like, fuck it, I don't care if it's a cartoon. This is a goddamn good show. But here it's like, I think they were accounting for the kids that watch Samurai Jack. It's like, okay, they're all grown up now, so let's up the violence here and raise the stakes that way. And I think it worked very, very well. It's a lot more serialized than previous seasons of Samurai Jack had been because they're building up to finally giving us a conclusion. And I think all of that works really, really well. Again, I don't want to give away too many spoilers for those who haven't seen it, but I know some people were disappointed by the finale and felt that we needed to get like an hour-long finale or something like that. I'm just amazed that we got this. It's like, do you know how many shows I watched that got canceled and we never got a conclusion to? Pirates of Dark Water is the prime example to me. Like, I will never get over the fact that that show never got an ending. She-Ra, the original She-Ra, Princess of Power, we never got to a point where Hordak got overthrown and the Horde was defeated. We never got that. Not in the old show, anyway. I don't know what the new show did, but... yeah, so there were plenty of shows in my childhood and that I watched that got canceled and we never got an ending to. And even as an adult, like Sarah Connor Chronicles. That ending was amazing and we never got a follow-up to it. I just talked about it with Lois and Clark. We got a huge cliffhanger there and no follow-up to it. And it's stuff like that that just drives me crazy. So to even get an ending to Samurai Jack and for it to be as good as it is, I'll take it. I'll take it because I never thought we would ever get an ending to it. And I'm glad we did because I think the people that worked on the show absolutely deserve to finish it. Hopefully one day we'll get one of these for the Thundercats 2011 show. That would be nice. I doubt it now because I think Thundercats Roar is going to destroy the brand. But I was happy to get a finale to this, and it's a worthy conclusion to a great, great series. And like I said, probably my favorite series that Cartoon Network ever did. I think it's terrific, amazing. And if you have not watched Samurai Jack, I highly recommend it. It's fantastic. Now, I've already put over Genndy Tartakovsky, so my next review is going to be on his latest project, which also debuted on Adult Swim, Primal. And the best way I can describe this show is that it is the most me thing ever put on TV. I would have said that that was Inhumanoids back in the 80s as being the most Patrick thing that has ever been put on the airwaves. But I think Primal tops it. What is Primal? It's a show about a caveman named Spear who loses his family and befriends a Tyrannosaurus Rex named Fang, who's a mother that lost her babies. And they befriend each other and help each other in a very savage, prehistoric world and try to survive while working together. That's it. There's no dialogue, which I love. It is violent as hell. It is intense. It is dramatic. And it's the coolest goddamn thing I have ever watched in my entire life. I absolutely love this show. I think it is a work of art. I think the animation is fabulous. I think it's the best thing that Genndy Tartakovsky's ever made. And that's saying a lot, because I put this guy over heavily. He worked on Clone Wars. He worked on Samurai Jack. He worked on Dexter's Lab. This dude knows what he's doing. I think Primal it taps into so many things that I've always wanted. Like, I've always wanted a prehistoric story with no dialogue. Land Before Time, it's my understanding that movie was originally pitched as being something like that, but for kids, like G-rated, obviously, but pitched as something with no dialogue featuring dinosaurs. And they changed it because they didn't think kids would get it. And I'm like, okay. But one of these days, I'm going to get that no dialogue dinosaur story, and it's going to be great. And we finally got it here, and it is absolutely amazing. And it's one of the coolest things I have ever watched. 5 episodes debuted at the end of last year. I've rewatched every episode 3 times, by the way, just because I love this show so much. And they debuted another episode on April Fool's Day that kind of relates to the coronavirus a little bit. And it's like, oh my God, this is hitting a little too close to home. But every episode has like, it's violent as hell. But the heart of the story is the partnership between the dinosaur and the caveman, and how they help each other, how they befriended each other, and how they save each other's butts whenever they're in trouble. My personal favorite episode And this is how I knew this show understands me in a way that no other show that has ever been made has ever understood me. So they fight bat monsters. They fight bat monsters. And they come across the bat monsters after running away from velociraptors. So this show, it's like, this is the show I've always wanted and didn't know I wanted. It was absolutely made for me. It taps into everything I like and everything I want. And it might be, I know I put Better Call Saul over as probably my favorite show on TV. This is very high up there too. And I don't hear a lot of people talking about it. And I'm like, dude, Primal is amazing and absolutely worth your time. I think it is brilliant. I think it is animation greatness. In a world where sometimes animation looks like garbage, again, Thundercats Roar, I'm looking at you, where it just looks ugly and disgusting and terrible. This is visual beauty. Some of it's violent, like I said. I can't stress enough how violent this show gets sometimes. But it is so fucking good that I highly recommend it to everybody. And more episodes are going to be coming in the fall, and I'm glad to hear it. I know they had produced 10 episodes, and I don't know if there's going to be any more than that. I don't know how long they can keep the show going, but I'm definitely down for more, because every episode has been a delight, and it's some of the most excited I've been about something animated in a long, long time. And I think it's absolutely terrific, and it's great. And like I said, it's the most me thing ever put on TV. So if you know me, you know that I would love something like this, because it's just so freaking good. But Jendy Tartakovsky is a genius. He's brilliant. He knows what he's doing. He's great. And you should absolutely check this out, because it's absolutely wonderful. Next up is another thing that debuted on Adult Swim. It was an animated special that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it debuted on the same night as the Primal episode that I talked about on April Fool's Day. But I didn't know about this until a couple weeks ago when somebody sent me a link. And I think it's a show with some potential. If it gets picked up and becomes a series, I think it has potential. And that is Smiling Friends. A show that is really bizarre, weird, and really seems like a throwback to the more anarchy-based, chaotic Adult Swim shows when the block first started. Shows like The Brack Show and Aqua Teen Hunger Force and C-Lab 2021. Shows like that were just random nonsense throughout the entire thing. And Smiling Friends feels like something that was cut from that era. Different animation style, obviously, but kind of has the personality to it of something that would have fit in with those earlier Adult Swim shows. Same length. It was like an 11-minute cartoon. And it was developed by Zach of Psychic Pebbles here online, and another internet star that shows up on it that I popped for when I heard the voice. It was Mike Stoklaska from Red Letter Media doing his Mr. Plinkett voice for this character, Desmond. And I absolutely popped for that. It's like, oh my God, where has this been all my life? Like, I finally get Mike doing voiceover work. This is long overdue. I mean, shit. And so I definitely popped for that. But basically, Smiling Friends is about people that work at this agency that it's almost like Care Bears for hire is the best way I would describe it, where it's like they help people that are sad. And they're hired to do that, and they're called onto the job to help people that are sad. But around every corner, something bizarre is always happening. Something crazy is always happening. And everything keeps building. I was talking to somebody about the show, and they said, it's amazing how nothing in this show makes sense, and yet within its own insanity, it makes sense. Like, everything in the show, builds off of, there's two storylines going throughout the show. One is about a guy trying to kill the mouse stealing his cheese, one of the employees at the agency. And the other one is the two main characters helping out the Desmond character, voiced by Mr. Plinkett, who wants to commit suicide. And the character has a gun. He's holding a gun to his head the entire cartoon until the very end. And that is a frighteningly hilarious visual. And to hear Mr. Plinkett's voice come out of that thing is even funnier. But every crazy thing that happens, it feels like it's naturally building off of something that came before it. And there's a couple of bizarre non sequiturs, like the boss of the agency is the creepiest character in the entire thing. And then everything kind of builds to this wild and crazy climax where everything gets resolved. And it's chaotic, it's weird, it's crazy, but it's wonderfully creative. And there were moments in it that I thought were really funny. It's like, they might be onto something here. So I think Adult Swim, I don't know if they picked it up as a series yet, but I think there's potential there to be really, really good. As a standalone cartoon, I think it works. The only thing I think is going to hurt it as a series is that the best thing about the cartoon is the Desmond character, and I didn't get the impression that he was going to stick around and be a main character. If he comes back, great. I'm fully on board with Mike coming back and voicing this character. But I didn't get the feeling like he was a main character, but he was the one that stole the show. So, but I don't know if that's going to hurt them in the long run or not if they develop this as a series. But I think as a standalone cartoon, I think it works really, really well. And I was pleasantly surprised by it. I was like, okay, this could be really good if it's given a chance. So here's hoping it gets picked up as a series because I think there's a lot of potential here. All right, let's do my final review, my 20th review in this video. We made it, guys. I know this was a long one, but this final review is going to be another Adult Swim show, and it's going to be one that might be a little controversial, given my opinions on it. I don't know how people feel about this, but we'll go into it. But that is Season 4 of Rick and Morty. Now, Rick and Morty is a show that kind of came the fuck out of nowhere and caught everybody off guard and became like this massive hit that has kind of broken into pop culture and become like a popular thing. And I really enjoyed the show from the very beginning. I have the first 2 seasons on Blu-ray. I love the show. I think there are a lot of things in the earlier seasons 1 through 3. I like season 3 too. I should get that one on Blu-ray too. That were great, and I can recall specific jokes, specific episodes that were fantastic, and all the different storylines that were building to different things. It was a very exciting, funny, creative show, and I would, as I praise the show, I would like to point out that yes, I know that Rick and Morty has kind of been overexposed lately because it's just you turn around, it's just fucking everywhere, and a lot of the fan base for Rick and Morty are downright insufferable. But I'm used to fans of the things I like being insufferable, so I tried to divorce myself from that. But I was excited for Season 4 because I liked how the show had progressed. I liked Season 3. I thought it had some of the best episodes in the series. I'm like, okay, let's go. Let's see Season 4. And it was split up into 2 parts, 5 episodes in the fall, like end of the year, and then 5 episodes in the spring, right around the time, close to the beginning of the lockdown. I was like, okay, let's see how this goes. I gotta say, I'm disappointed. I don't think this season completely worked. And the way I've described it to people, first of all, okay, of the 10 episodes, which, if you're gonna split it up into 2 5-episode blocks, they better be amazing, because we're getting the same amount of material that we would normally get in a season, because they're typically 10-episode seasons. But we're getting it split up into 2, which made me think, it's like, okay, they put like extra work into this. And then I watch it, and I'm like, like that's it, And the way I've described it to people, this entire season, all 10 episodes, is that there are a couple episodes in seasons 1 and 2, or season 3 even. There was an episode, I'll use a season 3 example. There was an episode in season 3, it was the second episode of the season, which has like a Mad Max setting, and Morty goes through this thing where he gets his arm mutated and it becomes like a living thing or whatever, and he gets into fights with it and he makes friends with his arm or whatever. And I didn't hate the episode, but it was one that was like, it was all right. It's not one of their better ones. I felt like season 4 was like an entire season of that, where it's like, it's fine. But that was it. It didn't leave much of it. Most of the episodes didn't leave much of an impression on me. There were 3 exceptions. The heist episode, the story train episode, and the finale. And here's why these episodes left an impression on me. The heist episode was funny for about 5 minutes and then became ungodly obnoxious, because it was just the same joke over and over and over again. Yes, you're pointing out the formula of heist movies. I get it. I fucking get it. And they just pounded that joke into the fucking ground to where it's like, just end this. It was insufferable to watch. It's one of those moments where I wish there had been a camera on me while I was watching it, because I was getting so annoyed while watching it. It was that bad. The story train episode might have been worse, and it was the first episode of the second block, so I'm like, is this just what the show is now? What was this? That was like Rick and Morty trying to make fun of the entire concept of story structure. It's like, we're too evolved. We don't need story structure. Story structure's too conformist or whatever. And whatever. I don't know what the fuck they were going for. They may have just had a bunch of rejected ideas that they just, threw out there without developing a full story for and just said, have at it. Just throw it all into one episode. I don't know, but whatever it was super fucking annoying and wasn't funny. And that's the biggest problem with those 2 episodes. They were not funny. Throughout the course of the season, storylines that had been developed throughout like season 3, like the evil Morty taking over the Citadel and Beth's clone and things like that weren't being addressed. And it's like, okay, are we gonna pretend like this stuff didn't happen, or what's the deal here? And it was way more important to have a B plot where Jerry was hanging around with a cat for some reason. That was more important. The dragon episode was kind of weird, but was like, had a lot of like orgy overtones to it. That was like, a lot of those jokes didn't land, and it was those 2 episodes I hated, and then a bunch of episodes that were like, it's fine. And with Rick and Morty, it's like, okay, I'll tolerate like 1 or 2 of those, but I expect more home runs than that, because the show is kind of set a pretty high bar. I mean, the Parasite episode, which is my favorite episode, the Parasite episode is fucking brilliant. And I amazingly funny. I absolutely love that episode. The interdimensional cable episodes are funny. The Tales from the Citadel episode is funny. There's so many great episodes in just the short lifespan. I mean, it's only 41 episodes long, I think, total, so it hasn't been around that long. And they've already delivered like some pretty high-quality episodes. Then you watch this season, and it just feels like there's a drop-off. The best episode of the season is the 3rd one that left an impression on me, and that was the finale. The finale followed up on some of the storylines, finally, and gave us something. And it had some of the better payoffs and jokes of the season. So it's like, all right, at least they ended on the best note. So I'll give them that one. The final episode was the best one of the season by like a country mile. It's the only one that didn't irritate me, and the only one that I'm not struggling to remember, because the rest of them just left no impression on me. And that's unfortunate. It's like, what happened here? Like, what on earth happened? Because I don't want to like shit on Rick and Morty, and I don't want to like be a Debbie Downer or anything, but I'm looking at this and I'm like, this was not up to the standard of the earlier seasons. It just wasn't. I know some people didn't like season 3. I disagree. The Vindicators episode, which some people, including Dan Harmon, who's a certifiable lunatic, by the way. I like the man's work, but that man is legitimately insane. But he said that the Vindicators episode was the worst episode of the series. I'm like, I thought it was great. I love the Vindicators episode, but what do I know? But I generally like season 3 a lot, and I liked it more than this. I'll say that. I'm trying to think, what would be the second best episode of the season? I guess the one with the facehugger parasites? I guess that would probably be the second best one, but I don't know. There was nothing... wasn't good. It just wasn't, I don't know. It just, the season was off. And fortunately it ended on the best episode, but it's like, dude, it's, again, I don't want to sound like I'm being a contrarian, because I know Rick and Morty is like super popular right now, but it kind of reminds me of when Archer did Dreamland. They did the bit where Archer went into a coma, and then the show kind of spun off into like all these different things, and the first one was Dreamland. And I was about 2 episodes into that, and I'm like, uh-oh, I don't think this is working. And it's like, so Dreamland didn't really work. Then Danger Island was slightly better than that, but that didn't really work. And then the Archer 1999, maybe the best one of the 3, still didn't work. And now it feels like the goodwill of that show is gone, because they kind of shot themselves in the foot with that concept. And granted, Archer got like 6 seasons before that, so it's like, they could pretty much end the show now and I'd be fine. But Archer is nowhere near as good as it once was. And this season of Rick and Morty kind of reminded me of how I felt during Dreamland, when it's like, uh-oh, I think we're kind of losing our way here. I could be wrong, but maybe they'll come back in season 5 and it'll be as stronger than it ever was. And maybe there are reasons. It's been speculated to me that one of the reasons the show didn't work as well is that Justin Roiland, who's the other creator of the show, was working on another show for Hulu called Solar Opposites, which I haven't seen. But this friend of mine, we were talking about Rick and Morty, and he was like, yeah, I watched Solar Opposites, and I think that's where Justin's attention was going. I don't think his attention was on Rick and Morty, and I think his contributions to this last season of Rick and Morty were probably lesser than the other ones, and it shows. If that's the case, I don't know if that's the case, but if it is, that's one answer. Again, I don't know if Solar Opposites is any good. I haven't watched it. I don't know. I'm just speculating at this point. All I do know is that Rick and Morty Season 4 was not that great. And hopefully it gets better, and hopefully nobody flames me, because I know, like, Rick and Morty is one of those things where if you speak ill of Rick and Morty, like, you get like a mob of people coming to kill you. But look, I was a fan almost from day one. I was watching it before most of the current fan base was watching it. I was watching it during season 1 when nobody knew what it was, and I set a pretty high standard for the show, and for the most part this season did not live up to it, except for the last episode. But hopefully the last episode is a sign of what the show could be, and season 5 and onward is much, much better. So here's hoping. But that is it. I have finally finished this massive review video. Thank you all for watching. Maybe I'll do another one of these after I've got a few more things under my belt, because I'm actually in the process of rewatching a bunch of things. But we'll get there when we get there. But yeah, thanks again, everybody, for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, hit the little bell icon at the bottom so you get notified when I post new videos. And follow me on Twitter. The link is in the description. But that is all I have for you now. Thanks again, everybody, for watching, and I will see you all later.